A few years ago, I worked at a small local pet shop during college. I was one of 2 women who worked there, and we didn't generally work at nights together. This store kind of specializes in saltwater fish, and reptiles in particular. To have newbie reptile or aquarium people, or people just looking to learn some more, before actually getting a little companion. About a year into me working there, this one man came in and started asking questions about the bearded dragons in particular. I humored him for the first couple of minutes he came in, and answered his questions for an hour and a half to 2 hours each time he came in. But then he just kept coming in, not buying anything, not looking at any other animals. He refused to talk to any of my other coworkers standing right next to me. He was definitely a dude with a creepy vibe. But after about the 3rd time this guy came in and questioned me about the bearded dragon's mating habits for about an hour, we all started getting uncomfortable. He knew my schedule because we were such a small store. I would call my friends and tell them to come hang out at the shop while he was there, because he was just so persistent about talking to me and only about the bearded dragons, with the occasional, "Do you have a boyfriend?" or a pickup line. I told him that I wasn't interested each time and told him I had a boyfriend, even though I didn't. At first, we were all pretty forgiving, chalking it up to social awkwardness, but it started to get scary when he would come in, look for me, not find me, but he'd find my car, which was significantly damaged, and obviously my car back then, and he would just hang outside the shop. My bosses and managers started telling me to hide out in the back, employees only rat mouse room when he'd come in. My friends were weirded out. I was getting very uncomfortable around him, and my coworkers were actively trying to curb his enthusiasm for coming in, but I ended up just quitting the job. Around a month later, I'm watching the news with my dad, and oh buddy, were we in for a surprise. This same guy had been escorted off his ex's property in a local town by police, came back to the house the same night and murdered her. When she didn't show up for work, her coworkers called for a welfare check. Police got there. He answers the door and tells them that his name is Zeus. It most definitely was not his real name. He lets in the police, and they found her body in the bathtub in a tarp. They also found bloody plates, silverware, and pans in her sink. He had cooked and eaten parts of her heart, liver, and brain. He's still waiting for a trial in our state, and his interviews and clips of news people questioning him while the police were escorting him to the court are just bonkers. He tried to claim demonic possession at one point. He had previously murdered 2 people and been released from prison before moving to our area. Trust your instincts about people you interact with. People are wild. Let's definitely not meet. To give the context of where the story is based, I live in a small college town near a small to medium-sized city. The town itself doesn't have a lot of people, and it's mostly here to cater to the demand that comes from the college. Because of this, the stores around the college are mostly open 24/7, so that the college kids will be able to impulse buy whatever they like. The other big seller around here is gas. Of course, gas can be bought in the city, but being in a town that is often gone through in order to get to the city, a lot of places will try to keep the prices of gas slightly lower than any of the gas stations in the city. My story begins when I was working overnight in a gas station liquor store, when I was doing part-time classes in college, but mostly doing classes online. That way, it wouldn't ruin my availability for a full-time job. The store that I worked at only had 1 person on overnights for a long time, even though a lot of people, especially girls, would complain of the lack of cameras and the fact that you don't always get the best people going into liquor stores in the middle of the night. The owner's hand was forced one night before I started working there. A woman who came in to buy milk went outside to her car, only for a man to come up behind her and shove a gun to her back, demanding for money. She complied, and luckily, he let her go. She ran into the store, sobbing hysterically, and though the police arrived shortly after, he was never found. I personally preferred having 2 people on, even if there wasn't a safety issue. The night seemed to go by so much quicker when someone else was there, and it was really nice that that person I normally close with and I got along so well. Overall, there were 4 overnight shift workers: Josh, Nick, Dixie, and myself. Dixie had another job and really was only working there as a favor to one of the managers, so she would only work 2 overnights a week with either Josh or myself. Josh and I worked together 3 nights a week, and Nick worked with Josh or me 2 nights a week. Dixie was really nice and fun to be around, but she didn't really like the job or want to be there. Josh would get annoyed with her a lot for just standing behind the register while he did all the work. But it was only 1 night a week, so he didn't really complain too much. Nick, on the other hand, was a bit different. He worked there 5 days a week, just like Josh and I, but they never seemed to put him with one person more than 1 day a week. Nobody really seemed to like him or like working with him. Nick was a little off from the start. He was one of those people who told you his entire life story as soon as he met you, giving a bunch of really personal details that no one was really comfortable hearing. One thing he always seemed to talk about was the strain on his marriage. Apparently, he had a really bad drinking and drug problem for a very long time, and the drug part got better when he could switch over to weed, but he couldn't seem to get the drinking under control. He was hard to be around, but you kind of get used to people in that kind of job being sketchy. I was there for 3 months when Nick's story seemed to escalate out of nowhere. He began telling people that when he was younger, he was diagnosed as a psychopath, and he had to take a bunch of pills for it every day so he wouldn't become violent. Not exactly what you want to hear from someone you're alone with in the middle of the night, but okay. We all have our problems, and some people get dealt a bad hand when it comes to mental illness. I myself have always struggled to get my anxiety and depression under control, and without medicine, I wouldn't be killing people by any means, but I'd probably be hospitalized in danger to self categories. So, creepy as it was, I assured him that a lot of people had to take medicine for some kind of illness, and as long as you stick to it and are honest with medical professionals, there's no reason that you can't do anything that anyone else can. He seemed pleased with my answer, and soon after, the subject turned to other things. He was especially cheery and nice to me after that for the next week or so, letting me know daily that he was taking his medicine and felt like things were going well with him. I always answered enthusiastically, but I'm pretty sure everyone, especially Josh, was aware of how much I wish he would just stop talking about it and would leave me alone. Josh had a wife and a daughter who was 2 at the time, so he couldn't help but see us younger girls through the eyes of what his daughters might potentially have to deal with when they're the same age. He seemed to go out of his way to end my conversations with Nick rather quickly, which I was grateful for, and didn't really try to pretend that he liked Nick. It wasn't long before Nick started conversations with me, going into details about why he was diagnosed instead of how his medicine was working, which I won't get into here because a lot of it was very violent and sexual. I told him repeatedly that I didn't want to know about that, to which he would act like he understood and change the subject, only for him to circle back to it about an hour later. When I confided to Dixie about it, she told me that she was going to take care of it and told her friend, which was the manager who had asked her to work there. The manager couldn't really do much, since I seemed to be the only one that he would talk to about these things, and told me to come to her again if he ever made me feel uncomfortable. It was starting to get increasingly tense for everyone working with him after he was talked to by the manager, and soon enough 2 other women who worked with him on the night shift reported comments he had made to them. I was questioned, in which I agreed that all the statements made by the women were similar things that he had said to me. Nick was given a final warning and a write-up. The next couple of times I saw him, he would go on rants about the people there, that they were only reporting him because they didn't like him. I assumed he didn't know that I had been questioned too, and neither Josh or I had any intention to tell him. He got so angry at one point that he was practically in tears, saying how lucky these bitches were that he was on his meds and what he would do to them if he wasn't. Luckily, it was about that point that his shift ended, and pretty much soon after he clocked out. Josh told him that we had a lot of work to get done that night, so we didn't really have time to chat with him. He nodded and walked out the door without another word. Josh wasn't lying either. The truck had came extremely late that day, so there was still quite a bit of things that still needed to get done and put on the shelf. One thing that earlier shifts never seemed to do, unless they absolutely had to, was stocking the drink coolers. It was true. It was easier to do it at night when there was less customers, so it was annoying since we couldn't chat, but we just went with it. I can't remember the time that Josh went into the drink cooler, but it must have been pretty late since we had been there for a while at that point. I was focused on stocking the shelves and making sure everything looked full if we didn't have it. When the bell chimed, signaling someone had came in, I threw out a good evening and that I'd be right there. Since anyone that came in that late usually wanted a pack of cigarettes or to pay for gas and cash, I put down my box and went to the register. Slowly, dramatically, once I could see them, you guessed it, there was Nick, not looking at me, but leaning next to my register. I'd be lying if I said I had a reason to be afraid. It turned out that he was drunk, but I couldn't detect it right away from the smell of the booze that always seemed to linger in the air around there. Josh was on the other side of the wall. Even so, I considered for about 30 seconds if I should actually go or if I should run inside the cooler to get Josh. Nick wasn't a young fit guy or anything. Years of drugs and drinking had aged him prematurely and ruined his body, but he was still intimidating to a 20-year-old girl. Unfortunately, Nick made the decision for me, probably tired of waiting. He turned towards me, and that's when I noticed immediately that something was off about him. My voice was nothing more than a pathetic whisper when I asked him what he wanted. He just stared at me, nothing of his face to tell me what he was thinking. I was about to speak again when he spoke. Barely intelligible because of his slurring. "He leave you here alone?" It took me a second to shake my head and tell him in a hopefully steady voice that Josh was in the cooler, and I asked him if he wanted me to go get him. Again, staring at me in silence. At this point, I didn't even care what he said. I just wanted him to say something. The silent staring was creeping me out. I asked him with more force in my voice, "What do you want, Nick?" As soon as I stopped speaking, he grinned at me, and in a disgusting, almost singing voice he said, "You're lying. You are alone." He laughed and took a step towards me, but stumbled, allowing me to take several steps back. At this point, I should have ran for Josh. I should have called for him, anything, but I couldn't believe that I was reading the situation right. Nick was really weird, but I had never felt actual danger around him before. He had never come off as more as a little unstable. He continued forward in his slow, stumbling steps, telling me to come here, I just want to talk. I kept out of his reach, telling him to back off and that I would hurt him if I had to. Josh was out the door in a second and seemed to come out of nowhere, shoving himself between me and Nick. They didn't even say anything. They just stared at each other before Josh said in a stern tone, "I think you should leave now." Nick stared blankly for a moment, then scoffed, telling us that we couldn't take a joke. I was trying not to cry at this point. The only thing more terrifying about the situation was knowing that if Josh hadn't been there, and he somehow caught me, I would have stood no chance against him. Josh left me standing with my back against the wall, corralling Nick to the door, completely unexpected on both of our parts. Nick turned and took a swing at Josh. Luckily, either because he was drunk or really uncoordinated, he missed Josh's face. Josh grabbed the back of his coat and brought him down as he smashed his knee into Nick's stomach and chest area. He used this opportunity of his sputtering to drag him out the door and throw him out, locking it. Josh had just turned to me to tell me to call the cops when we heard the sickening crack from behind him. We both jumped and looked at the door, only to find this big circle of glass. It's hard to explain, but if you've ever seen a movie of one, or an actual car wreck, when something hits the windshield, but not hard enough to break through, and it turns white all around the point of impact, that's what the door looked like. Josh didn't have to tell me what to do this time. I ran to the register and grabbed my phone, going to the furthest corner away from the front door, and huddled on the floor. I didn't even notice at the time, but Josh told me later, when he turned to see the glass, that was the first time he noticed that Nick had a hunting knife in his other hand. The fact that he tried to punch Josh instead of stabbing him is a mystery and a miracle. I was sobbing when the operator picked up the phone. I don't even know if she understood me, but between my distress and the sounds of Josh and Nick yelling at each other in the background, with loud smashes of Nick hitting the door, she got the urgency of the situation. She asked me where I was, and luckily, she knew the address, because just as I got up to look at the register to see what the address was, the glass smashed. I dropped back down onto the floor, and she told me that officers were already on their way, and to do whatever I could to get away or hide, even if I had to leave Josh. The hole wasn't big enough for him to get through, and he had made the hole by grabbing an ashtray from the outside and throwing it at the part of the window that he had repeatedly been punching, causing it to break through. He didn't make it to break through though. From that hole, he could reach inside and unlock the door. According to Josh, he walked to the door and put his mouth against the hole that he had just formed and said something that I'm sobbing right now, even thinking about, in a horrible sing-song voice that he used the first time I talked to him that night. He said in a happy tone, "They're never gonna find you two." Needless to say, as tough as he was acting, Josh was shitting bricks as much as I was. He was older than Nick, in his mid-30s, but he was a beanpole and wasn't exactly known for his fighting skills. Even so, as soon as Nick unlocked and started opening the door, Josh slammed his body into it, knocking Nick backwards from the impact. Josh yelled for me to run, and even though my legs felt like they would give in at any moment, I ran right behind him to the receiving doors in the back of the store. Nick was cursing and yelling for us as the door jingle went off. Josh slammed into the back door, cursing in pain, as he realized it wouldn't open. We found out later that Nick had pushed the dumpster in front of the back door, locking the wheels before he came in. We seemed to both realize when that happened that he was actually planning to kill us. Nick rounded the corner, still doing his awkward stumbling walk, though faster now. It at least gave me enough time to slam the receiving door shut and lock it. I was sitting in front of it, Josh bringing over anything he could find to barricade the door shut. When Nick reached the door, he must have heard me crying, because he kept calling out my name, telling me I wasn't who he wanted, and that he would make sure I died before I even felt the pain, if I opened the door for him. He started stabbing the door, screaming at me to open it. I screamed and moved when he stabbed it the first time, but Josh and I both moved immediately to hold and shut the door again. I remember Josh and I making eye contact. We were both crying, and I wanted so badly to say something to comfort him, but I couldn't think of anything to say. I had dropped my phone when I ran to hold the door shut, and neither of us could move to get it. So we had no idea how long until the police would get there, and the door was made out of wood, so it wouldn't last for long against his body slams, and offered no protection if his knife went into one of our hands. All I could think about is that I was gonna die here, that my dog would never know why I didn't come home, that I would never get my degree, and never have enough money to actually start enjoying life, that all my plans that I had made would never happen. It suddenly went silent. There was no police car sirens, no yelling, nothing. It was as if Nick just vanished. Josh and I looked at each other, not even daring to breathe, just listening for signs of life on the other side of the door. We both slammed to the ground when a gunshot went off, then twice, then a third time. There was more silence. Then a voice rang out, asking if anyone was here. We weren't sure if we should say anything. Then the voice continued with his name, and that he was an off-duty EMT who had been listening to the scanner. Josh got up and pushed the things to the side that were blocking the door. He opened it just enough to put his head out, and then it seemed like all his breath just left him. He opened the door and went out into the store, relief all over him. I ran and grabbed my phone, seeing that the call was disconnected or the dispatcher had hung up. When I went out into the store, where Josh and our rescuer were, he was in the middle of explaining how the police over the scanner were sending a bunch of cars, but that they were pretty far away, and that he had a horrible feeling that they weren't going to get there in time, when the dispatcher was telling them what they would find when they got there. He didn't want either of us to go outside until the police got there. Though Nick had been shot in the shoulder, he still had a knife when he took off. The EMT said that he was going to run after him, but with the state that the store was in, he was scared that someone was in here that could be dying or hurt. The next 20 minutes were a blur. Josh and I sitting on the floor, hugging each other, when the police got there. The EMT had called dispatch and told them of the new situation, and most of the cars that were coming to our location were diverted to looking for Nick. It was soon after that Josh got to use his phone to call his wife, and she came right over, only bringing their daughter because he begged her to. He seemed to completely break down when he held his daughter and hugged his wife. I had an extremely similar reaction when I finally got home and came in to see my dog's body wiggling excitedly, proudly displaying his flamingo toy for me to have as a welcome home gift. Nick was found 2 weeks later in an old RV in the woods that he had been using to do his drinking and do drugs so that his wife wouldn't catch him. Apparently, the reason why he had came after us was because he thought that the reason that Josh wanted him to leave so quickly was so that he could call the owner, and the complaint would have got him fired. Unknown to us, his wife had kicked him out 4 days earlier and was in the process of getting a restraining order against him over threatening texts and phone calls she had been getting. He stated that his job was all that he had left, and Josh needed to be punished for trying to take it away from him. He said that I wasn't the target, and that he didn't want to have to kill me, but that he knew that he had a much better chance of killing Josh with me there than Dixie, since Josh would be more likely to face him to protect me. Neither Josh or I called the owner, or even a manager, over his comments that night, though we probably should have. It was disturbing what he was saying in hindsight, but we were used to him being a creep, and saying really horrible things at that point, that it didn't even register to us that he could be serious about trying to hurt someone. I had known him for 3 months, and Josh knew him for about 6, and he had never done anything violent towards anyone. Everyone just thought it was all talk. The reason why I'm writing this story now, other than other stories on the sub inspiring me, is that I got a call 2 weeks ago notifying me that as long as there were no setbacks to his health status, Nick is set to be released on June 8th of this year. When I called Josh, he said he received the same news the day before. Neither Josh or I work there anymore, and Josh has since moved to a town on the other side of the city, and I have switched to going to college completely online and am in a new place renting a room with a mate. I don't think he'll come after either of us. I don't think he could blame us for what happened. I read so many stories after the fact. Everyone seems so prepared for what they'll do if they ever see the person again. I don't think I'd be any more prepared to face him this time than I was back then. I've had pretty intense nightmares ever since that day. And ever since I got that call that he might be released, when I close my eyes, I can hear that one sentence louder and clearer than I had ever heard it since he actually said it. They're never gonna find you two. I was 18 and got a job as a bartender at one of the more popular nightclubs in my city. To start with, I didn't even apply for the bartender job, but applied as a chef. The owner of the place told me that he wanted me in the bar where the people would see me because I looked too good to be in the kitchen. This man was twice my age. I worked my first night and felt very creeped out by this dude, so I politely told him that I didn't want the job. He proceeds to call me and text me for 2 weeks, asking me to come back to work for him. About 2 months later, I hear from my friend that the man had been accused of 5 rapes, all different girls. and a small explosion went off by the entrance of the nightclub, and the place was now shut down for good. Never heard how long of a sentence he got. Remember, always trust your gut feeling. So about 13 years ago, when I was maybe 4 or 5, my grandma used to work for this disabled guy. His name was Rudy, and my brother and I used to go there while my grandma worked. When my brother went back to school, I was still too young to go to school, so I stayed in his house with my grandmother. I was often left alone with him because my grandma had to go to the store to get groceries and whatnot. He was really nice at first, but he always had an off feeling surrounding him. I was a kid and didn't care about it though. He was always doing weird things, and it should have been obvious that I shouldn't trust him, but I couldn't not trust him. He would always give me snacks and toys. How could you dislike someone who does that? I remember the first time he did something. He pulled down my pants. I thought it was a game at first, so I tried to run away. He wouldn't let go of my pants though. I didn't see anything wrong with it at the moment of time. He tried pulling me towards him, but I was running in the opposite direction. I wasn't going to let him, not because I knew it was wrong, but because I thought it was a game. I finally got away and pulled my pants back up. I ran into the living room and acted as if nothing happened, but that's what it seemed, as if it was normal to do. He did this numerous amount of times, to the point where I knew it was wrong, and I got uncomfortable. This is all I remember him doing, but I'm not sure if he did anything else. It was years ago, and this is the first time I've chosen to type about it, or tell anyone, because I felt as if it was my fault, and I didn't want to be viewed differently, so I kept it to myself. Hi everyone. So lately I've had some requests to finally share the whole story of the homeless man I actually took in as a tenant and the incidents that followed. I'm just saying in advance, this is a long one, but every detail is relevant. Please note, although everything I have documented is factual, the case was never solved and has likely gone cold since this happened more than 10 years ago. So back in 2007, I found myself working as a bartender at a now closed pub in my hometown. Not a job I particularly liked, but it paid the bills. At this time, they had hired a new kitchen manager that we will simply know as Kearney. Kearney was a pleasant enough man, mostly keeping to himself, but always stayed late to help the barman do our closing duties, so we all liked him for that. New in town, Kearney had yet to find a place of a permanent residence, and I had recently lost my tenant, so someone suggested he ask me. He was considerably older than the tenants I usually took in, but having a streak of bad luck with tenants my own age, I thought an older man with a nice steady job may be a shift in the right direction, so I agreed. Kearney wasted no time and followed me home that very same night. Only he wasn't alone. Enter Lawrence, the boyfriend of Kearney. Honestly, I didn't even realize he was gay up to that point, but was water off my back regardless, looking back now. What really should have bothered me though was Lawrence's appearance. He looked like he had been sleeping on the street. So Kearney moved in. Lawrence was there a lot too, and it was easy to know when, due to his ringtone sounding like quacking of ducks. Kearney had some habits that were rather noteworthy to the story. In particular, he basically never closed his door, no matter what he was doing in there. It was always wide open. 2. Although he was a very heavy smoker, he never once smoked inside the house. So Kearney had been living there for about 2 weeks when I had come down with an awful case of pink eye. This being highly contagious, I was given a leave of absence from my bartending job, and therefore decided to go wait it out at my sister's for a few days. Apparently, I didn't mind giving it to her. So the day my sister was scheduled to come pick me up, I took a casual stroll into the bar that myself and Ben, my good friends from high school, at the time coworker, had been building in my house. And something caught my eye. All the liquor bottles were completely empty. Now, those who had been frequenting my house at the time would know that we're not just talking about 1 or 2 bottles of brandy here, but bottles of whiskey, gin, vodka, schnapps, liqueurs. Basically, it was a full-stock bar that could host a pretty big party without requiring much in the way of additions. So I called Kearney in, asking him if he knew anything about this, receiving feedback that Lawrence and he had been on a slight drinking binge. Those were the actual words he used that had left me both furious about the thousands worth of stock they had drank, but also slightly impressed that they were actually still alive. Regardless, I said I would be dealing with it upon my return. So I'm with my sister for a few days, and on a Friday I get a call from the local police department asking me if I know a Conrad Schultz. Ironically enough, I didn't. They finally add that I would probably know him as Kearney, and that I should probably come down to the station, as they just arrested his boyfriend for trying to sell my camera equipment. So my sister rushes me back home, where all my camera equipment was on display at the police station. It was on this visit that I'm informed that Lawrence was actually a Navy SEAL, who got dishonorably discharged before turning to a life of crime, and now had a rap sheet the length of a Bible. The kicker was, both he and Kearney were actually homeless men who had met at the Salvation Army. So Lawrence is in jail, and my sister drops me off at home. Based on Kearney's account of what happened, he had turned Lawrence in himself, as he couldn't allow Lawrence to do what he was trying to do. Although I appreciate the sacrifice, I told Kearney that he would have to go, having been the overall cause of all this. However, not wanting to leave him a homeless man, I gave him until the end of the month to make other arrangements. So Monday came around, and having just completed a staff meeting, I walk home to encounter a very much free Lawrence, sitting on the sidewalk across my house, watching it. I confront Lawrence as to why he's there, and he tries to apologize before begging for money. I dismissed him without giving him a cent. Now, I go back to the previous night. See, I mentioned having a staff meeting for a reason, as it was at the meeting where we had gotten a rather sizable list of liquor bottles that had gone missing from the storeroom, leaving us all suspecting each other. I, however, would not have to wait long to figure out who the real culprit was, as a few days later, I opened the garage bin to see the missing bottles, all empty and staring back at me. I decided to sit on this information for the time being, although I did photograph it just in case I needed the evidence later. I also called over Ben to inform him of the developments. As this was quickly becoming a detective game, we decided to enter Kearney's room and search for further evidence. Nothing of vast significance in there, with one exception, 2 single photographs of Lawrence, before he had turned into the homeless version of Lex Luthor or Charles Xavier. Actually, there were several of Lawrence's things still in there, but as Lawrence spent a lot of time there before the incident, I accepted this as normal. Now, I should also add that I mentioned Lawrence's release to Kearney and told him that if I suspected that they were still seeing each other, I would throw him out of the house myself. Only a few days would pass before this came into play. On this particular night, I had been bartending again, and Kearney had constantly been stopping by the bar to help himself to glasses half full of wine and half full of Coke, which he would drink outside the restaurant. We confronted him about this, but as he correctly pointed out, he was still a manager and we had no right to tell him what he could do or could not do. On his 4th trip, however, I had grown suspicious and decided to follow him outside, where I encountered Lawrence sitting outside, sharing half a Coke wine concoction with Kearney. This pissed me off, so the next day I returned to the restaurant with the photographic evidence and handed it over to the general manager, who was also kind of my friend. Although I hadn't physically seen it, I had heard a confrontation through the office door when he fired Kearney. Kearney left, obviously upset, and apparently had no idea that I had been the one to turn him in. So we had to close early that night, and I was walking home. Going past the high school, I saw Kearney coming in the opposite direction. He walked past me, literally only saying 2 words, "I'm scared," before disappearing into the darkness. That would be the last time I would ever physically lay eyes on Conrad Schultz. So we reached the final week, and before Kearney's eviction was to take place, Ben had to come to stay with me for the duration, as we both wanted to monitor the situation and make sure nothing else happens. It was in this week that Kearney's behavior suddenly changed. He was constantly smoking in his room and had his door closed 24/7. In fact, neither Ben or I caught so much of a peek of him in that entire week, which we hadn't thought much of at the time. So the day of Kearney's eviction comes around. Ben had to go home for a few hours, and I finally hear Kearney's bedroom door open. Someone walks out of the room, opens the front door, and leaves. I follow him outside, but somehow he had already completely disappeared. They had left the house keys, indicating that he obviously wasn't planning to come back. I took the keys, noticing something strange. Although the correct keys were still on the keychain, there were also several that weren't mine. Why would he leave me the wrong keys? I remember thinking to myself as I walked into his room. His room was a shock, not because of the state it was in. The two had broken the beds and acted wild monkey sex, but I had already known that. As I said, he never closed the damn door. But more that he literally left almost all his belongings behind, with one exception. You guessed it, the 2 photos of Lawrence. Upon further investigation, I suddenly realized that all traces of Lawrence ever being there had completely vanished, with all of Kearney's stuff still left behind. There was one thing of Lawrence left behind though, his duck ringtone, which it turned out hadn't been so much a ringtone, but an actual duckling, which now strolled around casually in the vacant bedroom. We named him Neville. So Ben returns and gets updated about the developments. Both of us are thinking the way he left was rather weird. Of course, the whole thing has been weird. It was only when I asked the infamous question that this all became a conspiracy theory. Did you actually see Kearney in this last week? It was to our shock that we realized neither of us had. Suddenly putting the puzzle pieces together, the changing of habits, Neville the duck, the wrong keys, only Lawrence's stuff being gone. It was a great discomfort that we both asked the question, who had really been living in our house this last week? During the next few days, Ben and I went on a mission searching the town, crawling into drain pipes, trying to find any trace of Kearney, but they all added up to nothing. Conrad Schultz had simply vanished off the face of the earth. That wasn't the case with Lawrence though. No, he was still around. Having made some new homeless friends, we encountered him several times begging on the streets. I asked him every time, "Where's Kearney, Lawrence?" And he just acted like he never heard of him. The last time I would see Lawrence was across from work, attempting to break into a car. I had called the police on him, and they arrived rather quickly, arresting him on the spot. While he was being led away by the police, I shouted at him one last time, "Where's Kearney, Lawrence?" But he just ignored me, and the cops dragged him away. The next day I filed a police report, reporting Kearney as a missing person, and suggesting that Lawrence may know something about it. But nothing ever came of it. So Lawrence, I don't know if you did something to Kearney or not, but if you did, let's not meet again. Where to begin? I'll just start back to literally last month. So I started working with this guy, who for the sake of the story, I'll call him Bob. Bob is a kind person. I unleashed my full throttle of sarcasm on. Making fun of him just made me feel better, but he seemed to like it. Little did I know that he liked it a lot. I just thought he likes being made fun of, so no harm done, right? Well, if I had been right, I wouldn't be writing this. To be clear, I only thought of him as just being a friend, never anything more than that. Bob is 34, and I'm 22. Hopefully you figured out that I'm a female by now. He also has 2 kids and 2 ex-wives. One of them is our coworker, who works in a different department. Bob starts bringing food in and candy for me and my coworkers. It made me feel weird, but he keeps insisting that it's just his way of being nice to everyone. Anyways, we become friends on Facebook, and he kept messaging me via Messenger and wanting to talk to me. I'm not always in the mood to talk to people, and sometimes I'm busy, and when I wouldn't respond to him, he would get all moody and upset. He started saying things like, "You're mad at me? Whatever I did, I'm sorry." And at work, when I didn't want to talk to him, he'd act all weird and moody. He offers to buy me my own pizza, which makes me feel extremely weird, but I just let it go since he ended up getting me one. I mean, Bob is just too nerdy, but I just thought I was being too mean and judgmental, so I kept talking to him every now and then. As time goes on, obviously less and less because I start to feel like he has feelings for me. But I start to second guess myself and just think I'm crazy. I still only thought of him as just a friend, a fellow coworker friend. So the minute my boss got transferred to manage a different department of the company, I find out that Bob is my new boss. Bob messaged me that same weekend, and I'm shocked and feel compromised because of the new position he just put me in. And of course, he didn't think of what kind of position he put me in, because all he was thinking about was himself and his wants and desires. So this is my horror story of how I got unwanted attention from my boss. P.S. I blocked him and he has no way of contacting me unless it's face to face. All of my coworkers, which are male, are aware of the situation and have seen the messages. I'm not a vindictive person and I don't want to ruin his life, but what he did I consider strike 2, and if he does it again, I will go to HR. I'm going to keep my distance, and if I'm around him, I keep a coworker with me, and he seems to have gotten the message. Update. He wouldn't let it go. He kept messaging me over and over again, and I had no choice but to go to HR. He kept on giving me the hard jobs, as if he was punishing me, and he would still message me. I get mad when I didn't message him back. I finally talked to my friends and decided to go to HR. They ended up not doing anything. He still has his job, and I basically had to switch departments to get away from him. I might look for a new job. A while back when I was working at a restaurant, I would greet my coworkers whenever I started the shift. There was this one coworker who would always reply by saying, "Hello, beautiful." I thought nothing of it at first. He worked as a delivery driver, and he would mostly be in the kitchen along with the kitchen staff. He looked like he was in his 40s, and he was a father of many children, and one of the daughters that worked with me. Sometimes, one of his daughters would come by the restaurant and wait for him to finish work, and I would talk to her in the meantime. We ended up adding each other on Facebook, but we didn't message each other on it. Later on, my coworker would message me on Facebook through his daughter's account. I wasn't fond of replying to his Facebook messages because he would end up flirting with me during our conversations, and I felt very uncomfortable. I didn't feel the need to confront him about it because I was quitting my job at the restaurant since I got a new one at a grocery store, and I thought he would stop messaging me after that. He did stop messaging me for a bit when I started working at the grocery store, until one day, he randomly Facebook messaged me, and that was when our conversation got creepy and disturbing. He said he missed my face, or something along those lines, and that he wanted to bring me flowers to my work. I attempted to refuse him kindly and explained to him that I had a significant other, but he didn't seem to care. He continued to send me intimate messages. I explained the situation to my significant other about what happened, and he told me to block him on Facebook. I ended up blocking him, his daughter's account, on Facebook, and luckily he never tried to reach me again. This was about 6 years ago, and my first semi-professional job. I worked at an auto parts counter, helping customers at a dealership. I'm a generally friendly and outgoing person, so when my boss introduced me to everyone, it went well, and everyone was nice back. But one guy was especially nice, just over friendly. He was attractive, but gave me a weird feeling, and I was in a relationship already anyways. It started off with him coming to the auto parts counter every day and making small talk, which I hate. So I would get annoyed because he was distracting me from my work. Then he would follow me out during my breaks and try to convince me to have lunch with him or to go meet him after work. He knew I was in a relationship and he didn't seem to care. Obviously, telling him flat out no didn't stop him either. After a few weeks of turning him down, he finds me on Facebook and starts messaging me over and over again. And starts messaging me things like, "You're so pretty. I wish you were single. Just one lunch together won't hurt." I ignored all the messages and ignored him at work after that. The messages turned into, "You lying fucking whore. You owe me a date, or I'm gonna tell your boyfriend that you cheated on him with me, and I'll make you lose your job." I still never responded, but I did take this to my boss immediately the next day at work. Well, Chad has some drinking issues, and I'll have a talk with him. Not that he would get fired or suspended, no serious action taken whatsoever. This man was 6'5", full of muscle, and I'm 5'6", and maybe 130 pounds. So this talk happens, and Chad seems to leave me alone after that. No small talk or messages or following me out on breaks. Until a few days later, he gets fired for inappropriate behavior regarding another woman at work. No surprise there. I started receiving messages again saying he's going to catch my car on fire for getting him fired and that he's going to burn down my house. Great, right? Gets better at the end here. He had gotten my address from my work application when I started and showed up at my house and breaks my windshield out. Turns out, the entire time he has been bugging women at work and harassing them, he has a girlfriend too. He beat the shit out of her that night also. He threw a brick at her head and punched her repeatedly in the face. He got arrested and goes to rehab of some sort for drinking. A few months later, he's out and the boss hires him back, saying that Chad needs help and that he doesn't want to leave the poor guy hanging. I quit and luckily never heard from that psycho again, but he did have to replace my windshield at least. That's my creepiest encounter. Bit of a backstory. I'm a 19-year-old guy. I was working with this guy and he gave me the creeps from day one. This was last year and I was doing some volunteer work for an old friend from my childhood. Most of the time it was amazing and most of the volunteers were super nice. But last year, between Christmas and New Year's, I was waiting to start school and text my friend if he needed help with anything. He did. I would walk the 3 kilometers from my apartment at the time to the warehouse, and it took about an hour. We were cleaning up for an exhibition. Most days we would meet up around 9 or 10 a.m. and we would be done for the day around midnight, sometimes later. So one night, as we were having a few beers and some pizza, I decided that I was done for the day. There's this guy who's been hanging around me all week who lives at the same point. His car was easy to recognize, with bright pink details. The first time I saw his car, I didn't think much of it, as the way I was going was a rather busy road. The second time, I noticed the car and got more suspicious. At this point, I have the emergency number ready to dial. I noticed the car 5 more times during the walk. Luckily for me, I always brought a spare hoodie with me and knew my way around the area I was in. So the last time I spot the car, having talked with the police already, I reached an area where you can't go by car. That's the last time I saw him. He didn't show up for the rest of the time, and I never made that walk during the night again. At first I thought he was just friendly that first day. I work part-time as a cashier at a fast food restaurant for some pocket money. And I move around a lot between the kitchen and dining room, so I make small talk with the other coworkers on the way. We exchange some small jokes time to time. Fast forward to the evening. We get out at the same time and he proposes to drive me home, along with my best friend. So we agree. Nothing too creepy. Anyways, fast forward to the second evening. He got out 3 hours before me, but kept hanging around with other employees. And as soon as I got off my shift, I see him waiting for me and my manager, telling me "Hey, let me drive you home." Anyways, as soon as we get to my street, he stops the car and tells me that he fell in love with me at first sight. I tell him I appreciate his feelings, but I'm not looking for a relationship, and then I tell him I have to go. He grabs my hand as to prevent me from exiting his car, and keeps telling me that he likes me and literally pleads to be with me, finding counter arguments for reasons for not dating him, and even tries to kiss me. By tries to kiss me, I mean tries to hold my head forcibly while holding my hand so I can't get out of the car. I tell him again in a really serious tone that he has to stop and understand that I have no feelings for him and never will. He finally let go of my hand, and I finally can get out of the car. I know this may not seem as dangerous as other situations that are posted here, but I still cringe and feel a shudder of fear thinking of what he could have done. Thinking he could have done something much more outrageous. I work at a large crafting store in California and have been there for a year and 8 months now. A little background before I explain what's been going on is needed. So last year we hired a guy named Hayden. Hayden was a little quiet on the first day, but quickly became more talkative over the next couple of weeks, and eventually never stopped talking. He would constantly say weird shit. For instance, one day he was put in charge of building furniture. Our store carries stuff like furniture and home decor as well. He was apparently having difficulty assembling the tables he was working on, and said something about cutting his wrist if he couldn't figure out how to put it together. Another time, we were both working in the stock room, and he kept talking about how much he looked like Parkland shooter Nicholas Cruz. I'll admit, he did in fact look like the kid, which was creepy. I remember one day, I had gotten off of work and was waiting for my ride to pick me up, when out of nowhere, Hayden walks up behind me. He just stood there with an awkward smile on his face, and I politely asked him, "What's up?" He said something to the effect of, "Oh, nothing much, just enjoying my lunch break." I was thinking about going inside Taco Bell and shanking someone. He pretty much laughed and said he was joking after saying that. When my wife picked me up, we saw him walking towards Taco Bell, and he just flashed us this creepy ass ear-to-ear smile. So the last straw for me was when he and I were assigned to work the spring freight and get the load up on a large U-boat. Our shift started at 7 a.m. and was over at noon. It was 11 a.m. and we still hadn't finished our task because Hayden wouldn't stop goofing around. He would also work very slowly on purpose and would only take one item to the U-boat at a time. Our boss came to where we were working and was upset that we weren't done yet. He told us that we would both get written up if the job wasn't finished before we were off. I was pissed off at this point, and Hayden knew it. He seemed to feel bad for pretty much getting me in trouble and apologized. He then said something that really concerned me. He said in a more serious tone than I had ever heard him speak since I met him, "If I get fired, I'll shoot this place up." He then went on to say he knew where all the emergency exits were, and would first shoot up all the cashiers, and then move on to the other employees in the store. I'll admit, I didn't immediately report what he said because it did have me on edge, and I kept thinking about what if. After some convincing from my wife, I finally did the right thing and informed my manager. They took a written report from me and contacted the police. After 2 more days of working with Hayden, he was fired and arrested for his threats. The week after he got arrested, the boss held a meeting with the entire staff and told everyone what happened. After everyone left the meeting, he pulled me aside. He revealed to me what the police and Hayden talked about during the interrogation. I don't completely remember what was said by Hayden, but apparently he admitted what he said and kept asking if I had been the one to report him. Fast forward to a few weeks ago. I was working at the same store, still am, and I was heading to the break room for my final break when I heard a voice from one of the aisles to the left. A man was standing next to a paint case and asked if I could get him some paint. While I was opening the case, he addressed me by my name, which I immediately thought was weird because I wasn't wearing a name tag on this particular day. Out of curiosity, I asked him how he knew my name, and he said it was just a lucky guess. To which I thought was bullshit. mainly because the tone of his voice seemed sarcastic. The entire time I was getting paint, he was staring at me with a smirk on his face. He began to ask me questions about my name, which is the same as a popular TV show character. He asked what year I was born and why my parents decided to give me that name, etc. At this point, I started to walk away as I had other things to do, and the whole time I was walking away, he was trying to talk to me. I heard him yelling my name from 3 aisles down. I went and stood in the warehouse until I thought he was gone. Later that same day, one of my coworkers asked me if I knew the guy that was buying that paint, and I told her I didn't. She told me that he had approached her and asked her all kinds of questions about me, if I'm a good worker, and if she likes me as a coworker. This is an ongoing issue too, as he came to the store 2 other times, one being yesterday during my day off, and apparently asked where I was. I don't know for sure, but I suspect this guy might be cousins with Hayden, as they sort of look alike and have similar mannerisms. Both look similar to the Parkland shooter and have that same creepy vibe. This might not be the scariest thing on here, but it's still freaky. Update. Tonight I worked the closing shift and was outside getting carts after the store closed at 8 when 2 SUVs pulled up into the parking lot. One of them parked behind the store and the other one parked in the main lot. I was standing in front of the entrance doors when a man dressed in all black wearing a hoodie stepped out of one of the SUVs. Another guy walked up next to him and they both started approaching the store. I politely told them that we were closed, and then I looked down and noticed a large baseball bat in the hoodie guy's hand. I started repeatedly ringing the bell to let me back inside, and those 2 guys were just pacing back and forth in the lot staring right at me. My manager let me back in and called the police. The guys were long gone when they got there. This could have easily been a totally unrelated incident, but I still thought to update because the whole thing makes me think it could be you know who. My fiance and I met a few years ago at a relatively small multi-department company. He still works there. I left almost 2 years ago and am long distance working on my education, and ex-coworker left long before I did. Ex-coworker, I'll call C, used to be perfectly friendly when we worked together in separate sections of the same department. He loosely knew my fiance. He politely flirted with me a few times, so I was polite in rejecting him as I had just gotten out of a bad relationship. However, he remained polite and friendly until the incident. C would go to lunch around the same time my shift was over and would often walk me to my car. Management had asked, as it was dark and the parking structure was rather sketchy, and he walked me there until I moved to an earlier schedule and would leave a half hour before C even arrived. After about 2 or 3 weeks of not seeing him, I ended up working late and was still there when he arrived. As soon as he saw me, he lost his shit and screamed at me for avoiding him and ignoring him when he was such a nice guy, and walking me to my car so no one else would rate me. Yes, he said else. Management suspended him, switched him to the graveyard shift, and he quit not long after. My now fiance is still friends with him on Facebook and didn't even know it all this time. I, however, blocked him on all social medias right away. Now that you're up to speed, my fiance called me earlier and immediately asked if I had been in contact with C. I said no, of course not, and my fiance informed me that C's mother came into the office to do some business and saw my fiance and recognized him from years ago when C worked there. My fiance was polite and made small talk until Mama C asked him if he's the guy married to... My fiance didn't know how to respond, and Mama C just prattled on about how C always talks about him all the time, and how apparently my fiance is so lucky to have won me from C, and asked how I was doing at university and if I'm still studying my discipline. Details that C should have never had, even through my fiance's Facebook. My fiance blocked C on all social medias after calling me, but I'm still shaken up. I've never been so glad to be so long distance. So, where do I start? I guess I can begin with a bit of background. This story takes place at a Kroger. I wasn't a customer or anything. No, I was an employee. I'm night shift, which means no one else is in the store but us employees. But when the store opens, there's a couple hours of opportunity to interact with the customers. So I met this man, and he looked like he was in his 60s, probably 6 foot tall. I'm 5'4", and he walked with a slow pace and a limp. Nothing too threatening, right? Now, I've seen this guy all the time, sometimes even with his wife. He didn't say anything bad to me at first, just, "You're working too hard." And that's it. I would usually answer back with, "Hardly working." Nothing bad, so very harmless and forgetful. I moved on with my shift. It goes like this for a while, with the same greeting and everything, sometimes even making a bit of small talk. He never really had anything special to say. "I used to teach karate," he says, "and I'm a 3rd degree black belt, until they kicked me out." No lie, he actually said kicked me out. So me being curious and dumb, I asked why, for reasons I honestly cannot remember. But I think in that moment of curiosity, he saw an opportunity to literally vent to me. This is where harmless goes downhill. He would share too much, way too much. He would say things like, "My wife hates my guts and constantly says she wants a divorce. My kids want nothing to do with me and took away all my weapons. My wife beats me and I got arrested on false accusations of hitting her back. I got married to my wife when I was 19 and adopted her 2 kids when it happened. I'm a 21-year-old girl who just wanted to do my job and go home. I don't care about any of this." But in my eyes, I saw that he felt lonely, so I continued to play the part of the listener. Time goes on, and I would see him a couple times a week, and he would take up at least 20 minutes of my time to talk to me. He said a couple of other things to me, but I've honestly tuned him out at this point. He literally does nothing but complain, and more complaining. It's honestly taxing to listen to him. So this is where I become just plain stupid, and I have since then regretted my actions. We were acquainted at this time. I know his name, his wife, and he damn well gave me more information about himself than necessary. So I clock out of work and walk outside. I see old dude. We walk, we talk. Well, he talks and I just listen. And he suddenly says to me, "I have my phone number if you want. You don't have to accept if I'm creeping you out." I felt obligated and dumbfounded, but I took the damn piece of paper with his number on it. This is a 60-year-old man talking to a 21-year-old girl. I don't call him, but kept the piece of paper in my wallet. At this point in time, I'm not really getting major red flags. He just seems like a lonely old man that wants to talk to someone nice for a change, because he makes it out like the whole world is moving against him and is out for his life. I'm not exaggerating this either. Moving on with the story, I let him have my number, not expecting him to call really. When I get a text, and I quote, since I still have them, "Please help me. I need to talk to you." I panic a bit since this sounds like a cry for help. I call him immediately. The conversation was a bit lost on me because he goes on and on about his wife was beating him and how he has no friends and how I was his only friend. How I'm the most beautiful woman he had ever met, the smartest, the kindest, and blah blah. He was on the phone with me for an hour, and I had to go to bed in a couple hours since I worked the night shift. He called every day, at least once a day. Dude knew my birthday was coming up and called to ask what I would want. I said I didn't care. He asked me about flowers and if I liked them, if I liked jewelry. I didn't care. He then said he wasn't going to call me for the next 3 days, and the next time he would see me, he would give me my gift. Fine, whatever. I hung up. Unfortunately, disaster struck and a family member of mine passed away. Cancer. It's just one of those things. I didn't know him that well, but he was a good, kind-hearted man. I went to the funeral to support my dad since He saw him as a father. I text the old dude to let him know that I can't receive his gift and I was going to go to a funeral. I leave work early to head home and get dressed and ready for the long day when my phone goes off. I got a text message from him saying, "I understand. I need to talk to you. Please call me when you can." I ignored that crap and moved on with my plans. I'm in the middle of the funeral, surrounded by grieving people chatting back and forth, when my phone begins to ring. My heart sinks to the lowest pit of hell when I recognize the ringtone. It was the old dude. I ignore the call and continue with the funeral when he calls again, not even 5 minutes later. I leave the loud room and walk into the hallway, answering the phone angrily and generally pissed off. I say I'm at a funeral and I hang up. He then proceeds to call me and text me one last time during the day. That was a total of 3 calls while I was at a funeral. Normally, people would respect other people's privacy when things like death happen. I turn off my phone. I get back home and I call dude to see what the hell was going on, and he doesn't answer back. The next day he calls me, moans and groans about how he had the worst day of his life, how his wife slapped him across his face and stuff. I'm sorry about the abuse, but I honestly don't really believe him at this point. He goes on for an hour when he says something that broke my sympathy for him. If I was younger, I would ask you to be my wife. What? It's true. I would want to take you ice skating, show you out to the town, and treat you like the lady you are. That's something you just don't say to a 22-year-old girl. I was at wit's end with this man. I'm done. So my birthday rolls around and he texts me twice. Please call me anytime you can and let me know how your birthday went and what you got for your birthday. Love me. Will you please go skating tomorrow morning, please? Let me know, please, for our birthdays. I wish I was lying about these texts. That was the last text I got from him, and I told him in person to lose my number. He said he understood, but he still called me at least 2 more times and talked to me on the phone for an hour, talking about how he would love to teach me karate and how I needed to defend myself, how I needed to prepare to take a life if necessary. Like, he goes into gruesome detail about what he would do to them. I freaking block his number as soon as he hangs up. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. Now we get to today. I saw him out of the corner of my eye, slowly lumbering over to me. I greeted him, but kept on working. He talked to me for at least 20 minutes. During the time, he bought a vase of roses and gave them to me. It was around that time that the store manager saw how long I was talking to him and came over to break it up. Dude walks away and the store manager looks at me, clearly concerned, and asked me if I was okay. I told her I was fine and that he was harmless. She told me not to talk to him for that long anymore and that I need to do my job and leave. I understood where she was coming from. So the store manager leaves and I get back to work. Minutes away from leaving when another employee walks up. He also knows of the old dude and I talked to him before. He told me that old dude had been kicked out of the store before for inappropriate comments to other female workers. He says he's got my back if I need to escape from dude, and I thanked him for his concern. So here I am, seconds away from leaving and staring at the roses in my cart. Yeah, I'm definitely throwing those away, I said to myself, heading back to the break room. I run into 2 employees just when I'm about to toss the roses. My employee asks me what's wrong with them, and I say I got them from an unwanted guest. It was in an instant that she knew who I was talking about. That dirty old man, she said. Clearly, a lot of people in the store knew about him. I offered the rose to my other coworker to get them off my hands, and she gladly takes them, saying to come to her if he bugs me again. So I'm flower free, and the phone number is blocked. I drive home and realize that I need to tell my dad about this. So I tell him the truth. Not about all the phone calls, since I'm a coward, but enough for him to become concerned. I gave him the piece of paper with his number on it. Needless to say, my dad's keeping a calm and keen eye on the horizon while polishing his guns at the moment. Update. It's only been a day since I posted the story, and I got one more thing to say. He came back today and walked up to me. I didn't even look at him. "I got you into trouble yesterday, didn't I?" I immediately said, yes you did, still refusing to look at him. "I didn't mean to do that. I'm sorry." And that was it. He said that and left right after. What do you guys think? I believe he's harmless, just doesn't know his boundaries well. Second update. Oh boy, he came in again for the 4th day in a row. This is definitely obsessive behavior. No one goes to the grocery store for 4 days in a row. He came in again and gave me a card, apologizing for getting me in trouble the other day. It read, "I'm sorry I got you into trouble. I hate it worse if I can't talk to you anymore. Please call me. You're my only friend. I don't want to lose you as a friend. I love talking to you every morning. You make my day. I'll be on my best behavior. Please call me." I let this whole thing drag on way too long. I gotta end it now before my parents become full-fledged mama bear and papa bear mode. So this is the final update. I guess I can finally put this whole stupid ordeal behind me now. I know I was stupid, but what else is new? So I told my boss about what happened, and naturally, he took it very serious. I showed him the card and everything, and he said he would handle it. So some time passed, and I still see the guy every so often, ignoring him like I'm supposed to do. I told my boss that the old dude was inside the store, and he literally went hunting for him, going up and down the aisles trying to find him, but no luck. I guess the dude left. The next time I saw him was more comical, really. I was talking to my boss about whatever, and I gestured to a pallet behind me that I had to start on. I was casually looking over my shoulder, and the old dude was standing right behind me. I made a weird gasping sound and spun back around, eyes wide, a bit caught off guard. I don't know if he was pretending to look for something. My boss picked up on it right away and said, "Is that him?" "Yep." "I'll talk to him." My boss went towards the guy, and I walked away, wanting nothing to do with it. A couple of minutes later, my boss found me again and said that him and the old dude had a small chat. Nothing bad. He basically told the old dude that he was making me uncomfortable and he needs to leave me alone. Things like that. First things first, I work in a very well-known casino in Lincoln, California. I'm a porter and I work the graveyard shift. Pretty much what I do is deliver water to the bars, do garbage, replace bags, help servers, bartenders, and bar backs. I'm used to strange people because criminals, meth heads, and just straight up weirdos are always here at this time. People don't scare me. I'm a 6-foot beefy fellow, and there are cameras everywhere. There's only one area that unnerves all the porters, and it's the second floor storage area. All of us don't like it, and we always pair up when one of us has to go up there. The reason is that it's so loud on the casino floor and the staff halls, but it is too quiet on the second floor. That's probably the main reason. Well, Gerald, my best work buddy, who was a 6'9", 290-pound ginger with a beard, and I had to take the portable bar in the storage area in our section. I grabbed the heavy one, and he grabbed the other one, and we took the giant elevator up and started walking. Now this is important. It's a 90-foot walk with 3 large right turns into the actual storage room. And this hall had scaffolding everywhere because of the construction at the hotel, which was directly above us. So we had to maneuver around. It's quieter than usual because the air conditioning isn't on due to the construction, which resumes at 8 a.m. We make it into the storage room. The storage room is massive. There are 5 chain-linked fence blocks with about 1 to 3 sections per block. Each block is about 83 feet by 45 feet, with pathways between them, which fit about 6 people standing shoulder to shoulder. Now each block has its different level of visibility. Some you can see between the shelves, and others don't go over 4 feet high, so you could see anything over 4 feet, and others had zero visibility. Our section is the third block. We take a left into the last section. There are also very few cameras. We put away the bar without much issue. We walk back and chat about the Justice League. We make it 20 feet to exit the hall, and I heard something. It sounded like someone covered their mouth and laughed, which is weird because no one's supposed to be up here other than Gerald and I. I stopped and turned my head to look slightly behind me. Gerald stopped and looked at me confused. Did you hear that? Hear what? We both listened intently, and sure enough, a small cackling occurred again. What the fuck is that? I don't know. Let's leave, I said. Wait, let's see what it was, he replied. I watch horror movies, and I know cliché when I see it. I point this out to Gerald, and he said he was going to investigate it, and that splitting up would be a way more dangerous option. I reluctantly go with him. We walk up to the first block, and I hear it on the other side of the first block. We peek behind the corner, and we see on the left side of the second block a construction helmet slightly peeking from around the corner. After 2 seconds, it disappeared. We hurried to the other side, but it was gone. We go forward a little more, and we heard cackling, but it was farther, on the fourth block. Luckily, the fourth block only had one blind spot, which was where the helmet was. So Gerald goes around to try to intercept it. I keep my eyes on it. He gives me a signal, and we both charge it. It leans back, and we nearly run into each other. We look down to see the empty construction helmet on the ground. We were dumbstruck. There were no other exits, and we would have seen whoever if they ran. No other place to hide, and we would have heard if someone climbed a fence. We look around. No answers. Gerald finally agrees that we should leave. We hurry out. I peer over my shoulder, and after we pass the exit, I see it again, peer slightly over the doorway. We bolt to the elevator through the scaffolding. We make it to the elevator and quickly got inside. We hear a wet slapping sound by the scaffolding. The elevator closes and we go down. We were both so nervous. I still have no idea if someone was fucking with us or something else. Okay, so this just happened 15 minutes ago. I'm still shaking from this shit as I type this. I work out of Five Guys, and I had a shift from 5 p.m. to close. We close at 10 p.m., and we're usually there till about 10:45, cleaning up and prepping for the next day. Usually there's one person on dishes, one cleaning, one changing and taking out the trash, and the manager doing paperwork and helping us out. I'm usually on trash because I'm not really good at the other things. The walk to the dumpster is about 75 yards away from the back door through a pitch black alleyway. Tonight, I had an absurd amount of trash to take out, so I was exhausted and just wanted to go home. On the way back from my last trip, my pants started to fall down because I wear them extremely loose at work. I don't know why. I stopped to pull up my pants and turned around to see a man sprinting towards me. My heart stopped, and I jumped like you would jump from a jump scare in a horror movie. I turned around and did a speed walk type of thing, because it's like 10:40 at this time and pitch black out. Shit reminded me of the dude from Get Out. Anyways, I turned back around to see what the guy was doing, and he was fucking gone. Gone. Disappeared. At this point, I full on sprinted to the back door. Yeah, that's pretty much all there is to the story. The story's kinda anticlimactic, but it scared the crap out of me. I work at a family-owned restaurant as a counter girl. My job is fairly easy, and when I turned 16 years old, they allowed me to become a closer. Which shouldn't be the name, since closing counter girls leave an hour before actual closing time. One night, 3 well-dressed and fit men came in. They were buff, over 6'3" at least, dressed in fitted suits with nice jewelry on. and I can't lie, they were very attractive. One of them came to the counter while my coworkers weren't around and asked for my number. I proceeded to tell them how young I was. He continued on with it and said, "Just delete the messages." I got his number and began texting him and felt relief that he told me that he was on a business trip and he actually lives in Texas and is leaving in 4 days. Those next 4 days, since I refused to go to his place, he was coming in every night to get food. I didn't mind it at first, but each day he came with a different man. When he told me he was only on a trip with the 2 men from the first meeting. By the time the 3rd or 4th day rolled around, my closing shift ended at 11, since it was a Saturday night. He came in again, this time with even taller and bigger men. I'm talking gigantic muscle men, which was very unnerving. It was about 10:15 or so, and he said, "You guys close at 12, right? So you're off soon, huh?" And I just smiled and nodded at him and cashed him out. I went about my usual business, and around 10:55, when I went to put stuff in the dish room before clocking out, something caught my eye outside the little kitchen window. It was this fucking guy inside his rental white Challenger with a black stripe. I recognized it clear as day since he boasted about it upon our first meeting. Sure enough, when I walk up to the window, they were in there waiting. At this time, I recently turned 16 and didn't have my license just yet, so my sister was picking me up. She parked fairly far away, past where they were, and there were no streetlights on or anything. I was starting to become nauseous. I immediately started panicking, and my waitress noticed. I told her everything, and she had me call my sister to pull up to the door. And I told her, "Please don't go outside, Vanessa. Let me go on my own." The last thing I wanted was for her to get hurt. But she's a mother, and she denied what I said and walked me out and made sure I got into the car and locked the doors. Once I got in, I didn't even buckle, and I said to my sister, "You need to drive, and you need not to drive home." My gut was telling me something, and it wasn't nice. My sister, obviously confused and getting freaked out, but did what I asked. I noticed them following, but she had lost them. To this day, I'm grateful for the waitress for helping me and my sister for acting quickly and not stopping to ask questions. I don't know what would have happened if I left on my own. Being a military camp guard as part of a small detachment, I was frequently assigned to do night patrols around the camp perimeter. For one of the patrols, I was walking along with a partner, wanting to complete the round before I turned in for the night. Walking around the building, we suddenly heard footsteps coming out from the building. We paused and checked our watches. It was 2 a.m. in the morning. We decided to walk around the building, checking every exit. It was a secured building that stored millions of dollars worth of equipment. Each exit was armed with an intrusion detection lock. Each lock was armed. We heard more footsteps and decided to radio back to the guardhouse. "Is there any night ops going on?" "No, everybody in the camp had checked out." The guardhouse holds the keys of the important key presses. When these keys are all turned in, no one except for the essential staff, like camp guards and other personnel on duty, are in camp. There's footsteps in building X. All locks are red and armed. Advice? Continue with your patrol. We'll check in with duty orderly. The DOS checked the building soon after, and there wasn't anyone around. My first job as a software engineer was working at Adam Osborne and Associates at the marina. It was 1977, and I was developing simple example programs to run on the earliest microcomputers. I had a lab area with the Radio Shack TRS-80 and an Apple II, a North Star computer, and a few others. We had a small number of employees, maybe 12. One night I was working late, 2 a.m. I was the only staff person in the office. All of a sudden, there was a horrendous crash and a thud, and I heard people running in the front door. I went to hide in our little stock room, behind some boxes. Some young thieves had appropriated a concrete utility cover from the sidewalk out front and chucked it through the window pane of our front door. Then they just turned the handle and they were in. Piece of cake. They grabbed 3 IBM typewriters and ran right back out. The whole episode only took 30 seconds and they roared off in their cars. I never saw the getaway car. I dialed 911 while listening to my heart pounding and waited for the cops to arrive. And that was pretty exciting. Then came the scary part, calling Adam Osborne at home at 3 a.m. and telling him what happened. Forever after, years later, anytime I ran into Adam at a trade show or a show place, he'd greet me warmly and remind me of the episode. I was in the middle of a job where I had been contracted to build a new control system for a calendar mill that rolled rubber into sheets. I had installed new control panels, and during setup, the system did not work as expected. So I was under a lot of pressure to find the problems and correct them. I had been poring over the schematics, looking for design errors, when I found a possible problem. This was late on a Saturday night, and I wanted to check the panel to see what could be causing the problem. When I got to the factory, it was closed. Normally, it stays open 24 hours, but this was a holiday weekend, and they had closed the entire plant. I had a security card that opened the doors 24/7, so I just went in through the back door and used the headlight to make my way through the panel that I had installed. I took off the back panel and sat on the floor. As I was busy tracing the wiring, a light was shined into my eyes and someone yelled, "Freeze!" I look up to see 2 cops pointing their guns at me, and they were shaking with fear. It was not the cops with the guns that frightened me. It was a raw fear that I saw in the cops' faces that had me scared. They had responded to a silent alarm that I did not know existed, and they had entered the same door that I had left open into the dark, scary factory floor. They had seen my headlight bobbing around behind the strange panel and taken me as a robber or an industrial spy. We all laughed after I straightened it up with them. I actually knew one of the cops. They both said that they were scared shitless of having to creep up on me in the dark, seeing my light flashing around. I often work at night, so as to not to get in the way of production. In another incident, I was working at an unfamiliar city at night in an industrial area. It was cold, with 6 inches of snow on the ground. All the equipment in the building was shut down, except for the industrial furnace that had a noisy blower running on a timer. The timer ran down, and the furnace stopped, leaving it dead silent, except for the footsteps I could hear someone walking across the roof. At first I thought I was hearing things, but they started up again, and I followed them from below. I went to the back door, made sure it was locked, and peered out the doors towards my car 50 meters away in the parking lot. It was then I noticed footsteps in the snow going around my car and right to the door where I was at. Just then I hear rattling and the shadow of someone coming from the fire ladder. I hide from the window behind a metal grinder and saw 3 hooded men drop from the fire ladder and go back towards my car. They peered into the doors, so here I was in a strange city with 3 men trying to break into my car and the building I was in. I finally found a phone in the office and called 911. It took forever for the cops to get there, over 30 minutes. It turned out that there were 3 kids in a gang who had set up their hideout on the roof of the building that was normally empty at night. They had hidden stash of stolen goods on the roof. No big deal, but hearing footsteps on the roof of an empty building in the dark of night really got to me. As a youngster, I was working in a food store. The shop was open 24/7, so naturally, sometimes I had to take the night shift. To be honest, I preferred working at night because there aren't as many customers and I didn't have to overwork. Plus, the money was slightly better. Usually, I was working with the same guy from the team, and this was a rule. Our boss didn't want to leave the shop with just one person. The area wasn't dangerous. There was mostly single family houses and schools, and it was in a safer area. One day I came in to work the night shift. I was waiting for my friend to join me when the phone rang. It was Tom, my workmate. He said his car had broken down in the middle of nowhere, and he couldn't leave it there. I didn't want to stay in the shop alone, but I understood that Tom couldn't just leave his car too. I would usually call Julia, another workmate, but I knew it was her birthday and she was throwing a party and I didn't want to ruin her night. I called my boss and I told him I would manage on my own, and he agreed on that. The night was quiet and calm. The shop was visited by parents who forgot to buy milk for their children, young men who wanted some beer, and teenagers who wanted to buy popcorn before they started to watch a horror film. After 11, it fell silent, so I opened a book and started reading. I was entirely wrapped by the crime story I was reading when I lifted my head and saw a man standing at the street, staring at the shop. Usually I wouldn't pay no mind, but this case was unusual. The man was wearing a white suit, a hat, and had crutches, as he didn't have a right leg. I felt awkward. He was just staring at the shop and looking at me. After some minutes I was scared and regretted that I hadn't ruined Julia's night and asked her to come and join me. After some time the guy left, but I still felt nervous. I was alone in the shop and didn't want to call anybody and wake them up. I decided that reading a book will be an excellent way to start thinking about something else. I opened the next page and the telephone rings. I picked it up and said, "Hello, how can I help you?" Nobody replied. I heard the sound of breathing. I asked again who was calling, but after some seconds, the person hung the phone up. This was the moment I was terrified. I was sure it was the guy in the white suit. I had plenty of strange thoughts in my head, including the one that I was a protagonist of a horror movie and was gonna die in some minutes. I knew I couldn't stay in the shop alone anymore. I called my father and immediately asked him to come pick me up. I also sent my boss a message that I had to close the shop because I felt sick. My father came in around 15 minutes, as he was also scared after hearing my story. For me, it was the longest 15 minutes of my life. I locked up the shop and was fighting the irrational thoughts in my head. After my dad came, I felt relief, but I also didn't imagine going back to work at night again. The next day I wanted to hand in my notice. I knew the shop was 24/7 and all the workers took different shifts, so I didn't want to ask for any special treatment. I went to the shop and started to explain everything to my boss, telling him that I'm leaving, when he interrupted me. He said to me that he was talking with some man 2 hours ago, the man with one leg. I think my heart stopped beating for a minute after that. My boss continued to say that the man came to the shop to say sorry for staring at the shop and calling at night. The guy assumed that he must have scared me by calling. The man also said that he had been many years abroad and came to the town after 50 years that night. He was looking at the shop because he was living there when he was a kid. As we understood, it was a normal house back then. His family had to leave the country because of political persecution. The man called the shop because he found the number in the yellow pages and wanted to ask how long the shop existed. Plus, he didn't even know I saw him. When he was calling, he didn't say anything that moment because it was very emotional for him. He started crying, and of course, he didn't want to talk in such condition. All in all, he wanted to know what happened to the house during those years. I was bewildered hearing the story and didn't know if I wanted to leave my job anymore or not. Happily, my boss told me the shop can only be open at night if there are 2 workers, otherwise it would have to be closed. In the end, I stayed at the shop for some time and promised myself not to work at night alone anymore. I haven't met the guy in the suit, He probably left town, but I hope he's okay after that. This is the scariest thing that ever happened to me while I was night shift security at a data center. I was just an 18-year-old kid, and my job was to sit in the office all night, alone. This was in the early days of the internet. There was no Facebook or YouTube to kill time. Usually, I took the time to study or practice guitar, but sometimes I needed a break from that. I decided to photocopy my face, which led to my butt and other parts. I'm the only one in the building, so it's super easy. But then, the paper got jammed after having copied my parts. There was about 1 hour before the early people would start coming in the office. I had no idea how to open this very expensive copier, and there was no manual anywhere. I was pulling the parts off, trying to remember where they came from so I could put it back. No smartphones to just snap a picture and know how to put everything together. I had pulled off and replaced many parts that gave me no access to the jammed paper. There was only 30 minutes before the first people started coming in, and what if someone decided to come in early that day? Long story short, I managed to figure out how to remove the offending jammed copy with literally only 3 minutes before someone came in to the office. This isn't a scary story, but it scared the crap out of me. For a while, I worked the front desk at a retirement home. My shift was from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., basically the black of night. The retirement home was nice, 3 stories, and the people lived on their own apartments and had maids to clean up after them. There was a restaurant inside that served the residents meals. Everything was nice and new. There was even an atrium in the middle of the building that had plants, water features, and a big jacuzzi. My job was to be at the front desk in case anyone needed help. Part of my job was also to walk the floors at night, just in case one of the oldsters needed anything, and to make sure the outside doors were all shut. It took me about 20 minutes to walk each floor. I had to walk the circuit at least 3 times on each floor, but it was up to me when to do the intervals. After I finished the circuit, I would go back down to the first floor where I could watch TV or read until it was time to make another round. I didn't particularly like being the only person awake in that building in the wee hours. I would have to go into the back of the building and check some of the doors, and that made me feel uncomfortable. One night, I was sitting on the couch in the first floor lobby, and I thought I saw one of the residents walking across the atrium like he was drunk. Sometimes residents would bring liquor into the atrium, which was okay as long as it wasn't in a glass bottle. I didn't have a good vantage point of the atrium, with all the dense foliage and my angle from where I was sitting. I got up and entered the atrium from the south door. I looked around just in case someone needed help, but I was the only person in there. I went back to the first floor lobby couch and started watching TV again. I couldn't concentrate on it though. I kept thinking of the atrium. Something about it was bothering me. I decided just to make one more circuit of the building. I got in the elevator and went to the top floor and started my walk. All quiet. I then used the back stairs to get down to the second floor. Also quiet. Except for one of the residents running their TV very loudly. But no one had complained, so there was no need to knock on the door. I was almost back into the elevator when I looked over the side of the atrium. I saw someone in yellow swim trunks. I wasn't alarmed. I figured one of the residents was taking a late dip in the jacuzzi. Supposedly the jacuzzi wasn't to be ran after midnight. But hey, they were adults, so I wasn't going to give them a hard case about it. It was getting near 4 a.m. and I could barely keep my eyes open. I turned on the TV and sat down at the desk to do some paperwork, anything to keep me from nodding off. While I was sitting there, I saw someone walk across the atrium from the south side to the north side, just like before. Okay, now I'm getting a little pissed. Sometimes the residents have a little fun with the staff. Also, some of these old birds and cats were getting it on at their age, and there had been some crazy things happening, especially when they brought out the booze. At some point, after 4 a.m., I fell asleep at the desk. I was startled awake a few minutes later when I heard some commotion in the atrium. I jerked awake just in time to see one of the residents run across the atrium to the other side. I only saw him for a second, but he had on the yellow swim trunks. I couldn't see where he went, but I could see that the north side door was propped up with one of the rocks that decorated the atrium. Propping the door open like this was certainly odd. Okay, fun games, people, I thought. Playtime is over. I got up and went to the south side atrium door. The door was stuck. I yanked on it, but it didn't budge. So I had to scurry all the way to the other side of the atrium to enter through the prop door on the north side. As I stepped into the atrium, I could hear that the jacuzzi was on the highest setting, and it was absolutely roaring. There was about a dozen beer cans on the cool decks. I marched over the fake bridge that spanned fake rocks over the river that was on the middle of the atrium. There was someone in the jacuzzi alright, but he was face down in the water. I jumped in and grabbed his arm to turn him over and start CPR, but it was already too late. He was non-responsive. I yelled for help, but the residents couldn't hear me. Most of them were hard of hearing. I tried to haul him up the jacuzzi steps, but couldn't move him much since he was twice my weight. I ran to the lobby phone. He had jammed the south side door open with some more big rocks, so I had to run fast to get to the lobby so I could call 911. The EMT showed up quickly, but my resident had set up his suicide very well. After the autopsy, the resident starter told us that he had 5 times the amount of alcohol of those 12 beer cans in his blood. I was pissed off that he played cat and mouse with me all night and left me to clean up the mess. And on the other hand, I felt guilty that I wasn't able to intrude on what he was up to. I blamed myself a lot for a long time. Also, if you've never been with a corpse alone in the dead of night, I can attest that it is increasingly horrific. I spent time working at a mental health unit for a private care home. There are always loads of stories of eerie things going on, and I never believed them. There are a couple of times I was freaked out though. Part of the job was to patrol the corridors, checking that the residents were asleep and in their beds. An important bit of info, which is relevant, is that the unit that I worked on was classed as a challenging behavior unit, basically violent or aggressive residents. The unit had been built for 40 residents, but because of the nature of the clients, the most they ever had was about 14. This meant that the place was mainly empty. One night I was doing a check on my own at about 3 a.m. I had pretty much finished my rounds and was about to head back to the lounge to continue watching TV in an attempt to keep myself awake. As I was heading back, I heard a bump noise and some muttering down one of the corridors. Thinking it was a resident, I walked towards the noise. It seemed to be coming from room 40, which hadn't had a resident in it for years. I was on my own. All the other staff were in the lounge. I didn't recognize the voice, and as I got to the room, I heard a loud bang. I opened the door and went in. It was a pitch black empty room, perfectly tidy with no one else in there. I freaked out and checked every room on the way back again. Chatting with the staff a few weeks later, they asked if anything eerie had happened to me yet. Playing it down, I said no. But it turns out room 40 was supposedly haunted after a member of the staff was fatally wounded there by a resident. I never told anyone at work about the incident, but it freaked me out. On a side note, not quite night shift, but eerie nonetheless. I was called into an emergency day shift. A resident was dying, and they needed extra staff to cover the floor while staff tended to the resident in his last moments. There was a call system in the building, like a hospital, which links to the pagers that the staff have to respond to. Each room has one, and the pagers allow you to see who's calling and if it's an emergency. Anyway, the resident passed away, and it was quietly told to the staff while they sorted the funeral details with the family. I was sitting in a lounge when the pager system went off for his room. Thinking the staff needed help or supplies, I went into the room. I popped my head around the door to be told that they didn't page anyone. I checked my pager, and it was his room that was calling. I reset the system and left. This happened 3 more times after that, each time within minutes of my leaving. Eventually, on the last time, I went to take the batteries out of the call system. A few minutes later, his room went off again. I still had the batteries in my pockets. We were all freaked out a little by this, so I went back one more time. The nurse that was dealing with the resident was shocked to hear what was happening. Even when I showed her the pager, saying it was a room calling, she paused and turned to the deceased. She knelt down next to him and said, in the most soothing voice ever, "It's okay, Bob. You can rest now. We'll be here for you if you need us." The alarm never went off again while he was there. We put the batteries back in after he left and the system was fine. Never had a fault again, or never went off unexpectedly again. Many years ago, I was a technical writer for a state office. My office was half of what had been an interrogation room for the Attorney General at one time. Since then, millions had been spent in renovations for the building, which had been built in the 1880s. It may have looked shiny and new, but it had some old residents left from before the renovations. I was working late and was sitting at my desk, which was U-shaped, with the center being the only open area for my office. A coworker came in, and the two of us were sitting there, at each end of the U, making revisions on a document together. Suddenly I felt like someone was in the office with us, but there wasn't anyone. The door was to our backs, but it felt like someone was on the other end of the U curved part, where my computer was. No one could have gotten there without walking through us. As we look at the spot where it seemed like someone was standing, the cord to my desk phone lifted, and it looked like someone had dropped it off the edge of my desk. I look at my coworker and she looked at me, and then we looked back at the phone cord. It was swinging back and forth, then suddenly it stopped in the dead center, as if someone put their hands out and held it there. It totally stopped swinging. She said, "Did you see that?" and ran out of the office. I left, took a walk, and went back to work a little bit later. What else was I gonna do? About a week later, I was at work late again. This time, I'm sitting at the bottom of the U, at my computer. Off to my left, I had a stack of papers, maybe 10 or 12 pages, and my glasses were laying on top of them. There was nothing near them, no air conditioning vents, and they were out of my reach. However, as I was typing, out of the corner of my eye, I saw some movement. I turned my head just in time to see the pile of papers, with my glasses on top of them, slide about 6 inches down my desk. Other things had happened over the years, but these were the two that stood out most in my mind. This was a long time ago. Let's see, about 37 years ago, as of 2016. I worked at a full-service gas station just off the highway around the South Manchester, Connecticut, USA area, just off Highway 84, going towards Hartford. Usually it was pretty quiet at night, but one time we got robbed. The robbers pulled up to the gas pumps in a car. They asked for money in the drawer. One guy had a gun, and the other guy had the gas pump. Somehow, they ended up spraying me with gasoline, and they were flicking a big lighter. They got the money and drove off. I called the police, who in turn called an ambulance. Then I called my parents. Somehow my parents beat the ambulance to the hospital, where I had a saline flush to get the gasoline out of my eyes and nostrils. This was one of many interesting nights I had as a teenager working at gas stations, but the risk of being burned by a madman with a lighter while doused in gasoline certainly takes a cake. I'm a 27-year-old male, and I live in the UK with my fiancée. I currently work as a teaching assistant for teenagers with special education needs in a school not far from the Bradgate Park. I have worked in a number of schools, in children's homes, and now these buildings, especially in children's homes. This particular story happened in 2013, when I had just started working as a support worker at a care home for teenagers and young adults, 18 to 30, with autism, brain damage, and challenging behavior. The house that I worked in was pretty big. There were 2 living rooms, a large kitchen, a game room, a study, and 5 bedrooms. There was also a huge garden, with a summer house/activity room that led onto acres of fields and woodlands. I had been working there for about 3 weeks, and primarily worked the waking night shift. This shift ran from 12 p.m. until 8 a.m., and it was my duty to make sure all the residents were settled in for the night and to get all the cleaning done before the next day's staff come in to take over. I would usually get all my jobs done around 1 a.m. and spend the rest of the night listening for anyone that woke up. I would watch TV, or sometimes just play games on my phone once I was finished. The residents usually slept all night. One particular night, a young man named James was particularly restless. He was not very big, but he had a lot of strength behind him. And when he got into one of his bad moods, the slightest thing could set him off. He once threw a member of the staff through the patio door because she had forgotten to put cold water in his tea before he drank it. He could not form sentences and would communicate with fairly simple words put together in a way that he understood. For example, he would say something like, "James, make breakfast," when he was ready for breakfast, or "James, go outside," if he wanted to play outside. He was generally well behaved and could be quite funny when he wanted to be, but he was well known for his temper. Around 11 p.m., James got up and came downstairs to make a drink. I stood in the doorway and watched to make sure he didn't break anything or hurt himself, and he eventually went back upstairs without any real bother. I sat on the top step and kept my eye on his door for maybe 15 minutes or so to make sure he didn't wake up any other residents. Once he had settled in, I went back to my cleaning. The room beneath James' bedroom was a communal living area with board games, a TV, sofas, books, and stuff like that. I was in there dusting and mopping the floor when I heard something heavy drop to the floor in the room above. I knew James was prone to temper tantrums if he got frustrated, so I went upstairs and knocked on his door. As I reached for the key to open it myself, he opened the door and looked at me. He seemed perfectly calm, and his eyes were almost half shut, like he had been asleep. I asked him if he was okay, and he said yes, and put his thumb up. This was something he did when he was in a good mood and not stressed out. So I left him to it and told him to be careful, thinking that he had just knocked something over. An hour or so passed, and by now I was in the kitchen cleaning the sink. I heard another bang above me, like something had been dropped. Then I realized that the room above the kitchen is currently empty. The house was set up to house 5 residents, but we currently only had 4, and the room above me was a spare, empty bedroom. I immediately went to go check it out, but the room was empty. I stood there for a while, and as far as I could tell, everyone was asleep. Due to the nature of their conditions and behaviors, each resident has an alarm fitted to their door that is activated at night. So if anyone leaves their bedroom, a small receiver box that a night staff carries will make a noise and light up for a few seconds to indicate the door had been opened, and is numbered 1 through 5. The alarm had not gone off, so I knew that the noise did not come from any of the residents. I got back to cleaning and didn't hear anything else for the rest of the night. The following night, I got to work just before 10, and as I entered the hallway, I could tell something was wrong. James was at the bottom of the stairs covering his ears and humming loudly, as 3 members of staff were with him. After a few minutes, he was escorted to his sitting room, and the house manager gave me a rundown of what had been going on. Apparently, for the last few hours, James had been quite agitated and kept repeating the phrase, "Sarah, little girl." This is something we had never experienced with him before, and the general conclusion was that he saw something on TV or in a movie that stuck in his head and made him repeat the phrase. Once James had settled in bed, the night staff left and the other member of the staff that was sleeping in went to the staff bedroom. I got on with my tasks, as usual, and finished around 1 a.m. So after that I went upstairs to do a quick check on all the residents, but as I got onto the first floor landing, I noticed the light had been turned off. There were 2 small corridors leading to the bedrooms on the left and right hand sides of the staircase. James' room was on the left, and the light switch was just outside his room. I turned the corner and flicked the switch, and there, in the darkness and complete silence, was James. He stood in the corner completely naked, and his eyes as wide as he could possibly hold them. I'm a big guy, 6'3", and weigh about 220 pounds, but at that moment I felt really creeped out. I spoke calmly to James and asked him what was going on, and for a while he said nothing at all. Then, as I turned the light back on, he went into an ear-piercing scream and started slapping himself around the face. The sleeping staff woke up at this point and helped me calm down the situation and get James back into bed before reassuring the other residents that everything was fine. After that night I had 4 days off. My shift patterns were 7 days on, 2 days off, followed by 8 days on and 4 days off, and I was relieved that this incident happened just before my time off began. I got back to work the following week and was told that the situation with James talking about the little girl had got worse. He would spend hours staring out the window that overlooked the garden, saying, "Little girl, where are you, little girl?" And no one knew where he got that phrase from. That night, around 3 a.m., the alarm went off to say that door 5, the spare room, had been opened. Now, this instantly seemed a bit weird, as the door to the spare room was always kept locked, because it was being used as storage at the time. I went up to investigate and found James standing in the room, in the dark. He didn't seem to notice me enter, and he just stood there whispering, "Where are you?" over and over again. I gently touched him on the shoulder and said something like, "Come on, mate, let's go back to bed. It's late." James turned around and started heading back to his room, and for a second I was relieved. As I locked the door to the spare room, he screamed out, "Oh no!" and started slamming the door with both fists. As he did this, the alarm went off to indicate that the front door had been opened. The only people with a key to the front door were myself and the house manager. The door has 4 locks on it, 2 that require a key, and 2 others that require electric ID cards. Now it's 3:25 a.m. and the manager never came in before 8, so I presumed that there must be some kind of mistake and continued to diffuse the situation with James. He finally calmed down and went back to his room. So then I went downstairs to check on the front door. To my surprise, it was wide open. I shut it immediately and started to check every room in the house in case someone had got in. I then checked each of the residents to make sure they were still in the house. Everything was fine. The next night, everything was calm around 2 a.m. when one of the other residents, Connor, got up and said someone was tapping on his window. I guessed that he must have been dreaming, since his window was on the 3rd floor of the house and at least 25 feet off the ground. I went back up to his room with him to reassure and check his window. Sure enough, it was shut and securely locked. As he got back in bed, I heard footsteps on the stairs outside his room. He froze for a second and looked at me with an expression of pure panic on his face. I opened the door to see who it was, but no one was there. He was clearly scared by this and said, "Is he back?" My blood ran cold, and I asked, "Is who back? What do you mean?" Connor looked over my shoulder and then sank back into bed, pulling the duvet up to his mouth. I turned around to see what he was looking at, but there was still no one there. Tell him to go away," Connor said in a hushed, scared voice. I tried to reassure him that there was no one there, and I left the bedside lamp on before leaving his room. I went downstairs and sat outside on the patio with a cup of coffee. It was the middle of January and was about -2 outside, but I felt like I had to get out of the house for a while. After about 40 minutes, I went back inside and washed my cup in the sink, dried it, and put it back in the cupboard. Beneath the cupboard was a locked, secured drawer where we kept all the sharp knives until needed. The drawer was slightly open, This was obviously a major issue, as none of the residents were allowed to access the knife drawer without supervision. I counted all the knives and realized that there was one missing. So I woke up the sleep-in staff and told her the situation, and we began a search. Nearly 2 hours later, we still hadn't found the missing knife, so we decided to keep up our guard and make sure none of the residents were hiding it. 2 hours later, at 5:30, the alarm sounded. It was the door to the spare room again. I went up to check it and found that the door was locked. How could the alarm have been activated by the door opening if the door was still locked? I went inside and turned the light on. To this day, I still have no explanation for what I found, and I often think about this incident. The bed had been pushed from its usual place and was against the wall, and the wardrobe doors were open. There were screws and nails all over the floor, but nothing was broken. But the most disturbing part, in the middle of the room, there was a child's doll, a gold bracelet, and the missing knife from the kitchen. The doll was an old-style baby doll. My guess that it was made in the 50s, from the style of clothes and the overall look of the doll. The bracelet was simple but old-looking. I left everything as it was and reported to the manager as soon as she arrived. No one ever claimed the bracelet belonging to them, and it was taken to a charity shop soon after, along with the doll. After the doll and bracelet were moved from the house, James seemed to calm down and never mentioned the little girl or stood in the dark again. I still don't have an explanation for everything, and sometimes I think that the combination of strange behavior from a young, autistic guy and the fact that the house was old. But on the other hand, a lot of stuff happened that I can't really explain. My only regret now is that the doll and bracelets are gone and can never be examined or identified. Maybe it was paranormal, who knows, but now I work day shifts and do not plan on working night shifts anytime soon. This all happened when I was about 16. I was in high school and working at my first part-time job at a fast food restaurant. It was located off a highway and wasn't uncommon to get a lot of crazy customers. I arrived at work one day and was surprised to see that my schedule that week had changed, giving me a graveyard shift on Friday night. The thought of being at this place overnight gave me the creeps, and I thought my manager was insane by making the youngest employee take that night shift. But it wasn't a school night, and I didn't want to seem like a baby, so I just accepted it. When the night came, it was just me and another coworker, who was a larger man and was very friendly, so it made me feel safe and comfortable with him there. Before leaving, my manager gave me a rundown on how the night was supposed to go. At 11 o'clock, I was to lock the doors, and we would only be taking drive-through orders. But on this particular night, just my luck, one of the main door had been broken and wouldn't lock properly. If anyone comes in, just tell them they can't be in the lobby and they have to order through the drive-thru. After these words of wisdom, my manager went home to the comfort of his bed and I started my long night. Being slightly paranoid and not used to the new shift, every noise I heard outside made me jump. A few times, some customers came in through the unlocked door, but quickly and politely left after being asked to go through the drive-thru. When it reached 1 a.m. in the morning, I was in the back of the store organizing boxes when I heard the slam of the heavy door close. I ran to the front to tell whoever it was that they needed to leave, but I saw no one. I walked into the lobby and looked all around but didn't see anyone. "Did you hear someone come in?" I asked my coworker, as he also came to investigate. "Maybe they left. I'll check the bathroom to be safe," he said, as he opened the men's bathroom, then quickly came out. "Nope, no one in here." "You should go check the girls' bathroom." I agreed and opened the door to the women's bathroom. At first I didn't see anything, so I called out, "Anyone in here?" No response. To double check, I needed to take a few steps into the bathroom, and at this time I was able to see some feet behind the stall. The stall door was wide open, and as I got closer, I was able to see inside. My stomach instantly sank. I caught the eye of a woman with long tangled brown hair crouched next to the toilet with a needle in her arm. She jumped up out of surprise and ripped the needle out of her arm, squirting blood all over the floor. She raised the needle over her head and started to move towards me. I let out a scream and ran out as fast as I could, past my coworker. I whipped around just in time to see her running out the front door. My heart was racing, and I was scared to death and ended up going home right after. I quit the next day. So lady shooting up in the bathroom at 1 a.m. Let's not meet again. So my dad has always been that type of guy who doesn't believe in anything unless he witnesses himself. He was a pretty macho guy and isn't into all the fairy tale and ghost nonsense. Yet that all changed for him one day. It was about 2:30 in the afternoon when my dad came home. He works a night shift at the old El Reno prison. He says that it's a pretty laid back job for the most part. He usually drives around the prison in one of the guards' trucks or keeps watching the tower. But one night he was sent to do a sweep of the chapel as to make sure no one was in there that shouldn't be. His boss, let's call him Jack, told him to come back and check in with him after he had done so. My dad walked through the yard out to the chapel, and as soon as he walked in, he said he felt a wave of nervousness come over him. He flicked on the old lights and walked in and began to check around the room. After a couple minutes, he saw a man dressed in the same uniform as him walk out of one of the little offices in the back. My dad asked the man if he was already doing a sweep of the chapel, and the man replied, "Yes, I'll take it from here." So confused as to why he was sent out there to check the chapel, my dad just gave a little, "Oh, okay, I'll let Jack know." My dad returned to his boss about 15 minutes later after he had sent him. Jack looked at him and asked, "How did you get done so fast? You couldn't have properly checked the whole place in such a short amount of time." "Another guard was there. He said he checked it," my dad said. And I guess Jack didn't know anything of it. As long as the chapel was checked, everything was fine with him. Well, this is where it gets creepy. About 3 days later, my dad said he was walking down the halls of the prison and stopped to look at the display case of all the old photos of the guards in the past. As he was browsing the photos, his heart sank and his blood froze. One of the pictures he came across was the very same guard he encountered at the chapel. Only the guard was dead. Apparently about 4 years before my dad started working there, a riot broke out in the middle of the chapel and the guard was stabbed to death. And that guard was the same man my dad saw in the old chapel. But out of the 12 years of working there, not once had he ever heard about the riot until now. I don't know if they just don't talk about it, scared it might run off some newbies. All I can say is, my dad is now a firm believer of the paranormal, and not once has he ever been back to that creepy chapel. A little over a year ago, I had a job working overnight at a gas station that was close to my house. I'm a woman, and I was 31 at the time. I noticed it seems unsafe for a woman to work graveyard shift by herself. However, it was a slow store, and the sheriff's office was about 20 feet away from it. I really didn't think I would have any problems. There would only be about 30 customers in an 8-hour shift, and that was on a busier night. It was about 3:30 in the morning. I went outside to sweep the parking lot and make one last check of the trash. It was time for a cigarette, and I had one headphone kinda jamming out. Across the road in the parking lot of the sheriff's office, I saw a figure with his back to me. He was swaying back and forth while looking down. Honestly, it looked like he was enjoying a much needed piss. Against the sheriff's office though? Yeah, the building was closed at 4 p.m. and didn't open until 6 in the morning. By the back of his ripped white t-shirt, I remember that he had came in the store about 4 hours earlier. He was a total creep, and I could already tell he had a good buzz going. I didn't say anything. I just took my eyes off of him and tried not to draw any attention to myself. It was working until a car pulled up. I was still outside as they pulled up. I saw him look at the car and then look at me and back and forth again. And after I was done serving her, I walked her outside. I still had a half smoke burning and had left my dustpan and squeegee. We both heard him start to swear angrily and seemingly engaged in an argument with himself. She looked across the road and told me to be careful. The man was still there, but closer to the road and now facing the parking lot of my store. Whatever he was yelling was completely unintelligible. He was obviously very drunk and could barely stand straight, still swaying away. I still didn't engage him, but I also didn't take my eyes off of him this time. I slowly walked back in the store. Something about his face really bothered me. It had a darkness to it, and his eyes looked wild. I don't like it at all, and I wanted no part of it, but I still had almost 3 hours to go, and 2 more to go before any other employees got there. Instantly I went to the computer and typed temporary close sign just in case he wanted trouble. I was coming around the counter on my way to the door when I saw that he had walked across the road and is now on my side of the parking lot. I literally just barely got the second door locked when he stumbled into our very small parking lot. My hand mimed the hand signal for cut across my neck before saying, "Nope, sorry, you can't come in here, we're closed." I shook my head back and forth, hoping to further discourage him. He starts walking away, but screamed something at me while he was walking. I don't mean he was grumpy or yelled that I was an asshole or anything. He was at an enraged volume and was throwing his hands everywhere. I got really skeeved out. I decided to call the cops. It's a good thing too, because the minute I hung up the phone with them, there he comes again up to the door. He starts pulling and banging on it. He backs up and runs into it, trying to ram it. I made the mistake of telling him I had called the cops and his ass was about to be grassed. I say I made a mistake of telling him because once I said it, he took off. The police never found him. They drove around the road and the surrounding neighborhoods for over an hour, but found no one. He was on foot, so I don't get where he could have gone. Since he didn't harm me, and with them not finding him, I never filled out a police report or anything. I was safe behind the thick glass doors that were locked for the rest of my shift. It just sucked. Maybe if I didn't warn him ahead of time, I wouldn't have spent the last 3 months of my job constantly looking over my shoulder. I'll never know what the right choice was. I'm just glad I don't work there anymore. Back in 2007, I started a tech job with the IP phone long distance company. The company is no longer around, and honestly, I don't even know how they stayed in business as long as they did. It was really just a pyramid scam, but thankfully I was on the IT side of things, so I didn't have to sell anything. It was a small typical tech support call center. The customers would call in, or Verizon Quest would call and say DT1 lines were down, or there were outages. I was the only female on the team, having to prove myself. It didn't take long, and the customers respected me for being able to handle things. After making my mark, I decided to take the 10-hour night shifts. I worked Wednesday through Saturday, from 1 p.m. to 12 a.m., with an hour for lunch at 6 p.m. I was completely alone in the whole building. The rush to get out of the office at 6 p.m. was insane. I couldn't blame them, but I decided having 3 days off was better than 2. Like I said, I was by myself most nights. I would have to keep an eye on emails and make sure I answered all the calls. It was often a very slow shift. I would get a lot of video game, reading, and schoolwork done during this time, but sometimes I would just wander the building, walk all around just to get away from my desk for a time. I would have the phone system connected to my cell phone so no calls would be missed. This allowed me to go get a soda or get food and so on. One time when I was away from my desk, I was going down to the lunch room to grab a soda. The vending machine is on the basement floor. The basement had a wall of windows and one set of security doors, same for the main entrance, only there was one camera facing that door, but nothing else really to make me feel safe. I didn't like to go down to the basement much, because the back of the building faced an acre of dark woods. There was a walking path to the woods, but for some reason, they didn't install lights for the walking path. Not really sure why that was, but it didn't help for the creepy factor. Sometimes I would see animals run past, but other times, it felt like someone was watching me. I always tried my best to make it fast when I was getting a soda or a snack, but sometimes it didn't feel fast enough. So one night, I was making my way down to the basement of the building to get a soda. It was a slow dragging night, and I needed a little bit of caffeine for a pick-me-up. I counted my money as I walked to make sure I had enough. That way I would get in and get out quick. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw something dart from the glass door back into the darkness. I stopped dead in my tracks and tried to scan the forest, but like I said, it was just total blackness. I felt a bit of unease, and everything told me to turn on my heels and go back to my desk. But it was 9 p.m., and I had a fair bit of time left on my shift before I could blow this pop stand. I tried shaking the feeling off and briskly walked over to the soda machines and made my selection. The soda dropped, and as I bent over to get it, I heard a loud ping noise. It was as if someone had hit the glass with something. I stood straight up, and I felt the hair on my back and neck stand up. I slowly turned around and was completely scared that I would see someone out there. But as I made my full turn, I saw once again nothing but darkness. I thought this was a good time to book it back up to the main floor. I didn't even bother with the elevator. I went up the stairs, and I ran up them. My heart was already racing from having to go down there in the first place. Then the loud bang, now running up 2 flights of stairs. Once I got back to the desk, I sunk down in my chair and tried my best to calm down. It was just a noise. I was in the building with locked doors and locked inner offices. I kept saying over and over again in my head, it was nothing. I was relieved by that. But out of nowhere, I got a feeling that someone was watching me again. I peeked my head over the cubicle wall and looked around my office. Nothing seemed out of place until I turned towards the front of the building. Outside the first set of doors was a slender, tall, dirty male. He was cupping his hands around his eyes, trying to see past the reflection of the light inside. I dropped back down in my cubicle before he caught sight of me. He didn't look like anyone I had ever seen before in these offices, and it was a little past 9 p.m. There was no good reason why he was checking my office. As I sat in my chair, I heard the door shake. I slowly stood up and watched him pull the handles of the door, but they didn't budge to my relief. But as I watched him, he turns and faces me. His face looked bruised or dirty, I couldn't tell which. Once his eyes locked mine, he started banging the door harder and smacking the glass. I was so scared. It was the middle of the night. I was by myself and in the middle of the office building complex. I grabbed my headset and dialed 911. While getting an operator on the line, the guy was walking back and forth from one side of the glass door to the next. 911, what is your emergency? I need someone to come out here. There's a guy trying to break into my office building. While speaking to her, the guy disappeared from view. I tried to look in all directions, but I didn't see him. I knew that he wouldn't just walk off, not with how hard he was banging. All of a sudden, a good-sized rock came out of nowhere and smashed against the door. I screamed and went under my desk. The operator asked what happened and I explained. She asked me if the glass was broken enough to let him in. I didn't want to stand up and look, but she told me in order to know where he was, I had to crawl from under my desk and peek over my cubicle. So I crawled out from under my desk and peeked over my cubicle wall and saw a huge crack down the first part of the door. I sank back down and told her, "Please have the police hurry." She said they were on their way. I've read tons of stories on this subreddit, and people say that the cops couldn't get there fast enough. They aren't kidding. It felt like time is standing still, and there's nothing you can do. Another smash against the door, but along with the glass breaking sounds, I could hear sirens coming towards my building. It was music to my ears. I told the operator that the police had arrived and thanked her for her support. I stood back up and looked over the cubicle wall, and all I could see was blue and red lights flashing wildly. But the thing is, I couldn't see where the man was. The top part of the door was completely smashed, and the rock was lying inside the entryway. One officer came to the front door, and the others were combing the area. The first officer that came into the building was a very kind man. He was patient with me and let me explain what I saw and what happened. Soon later, my boss arrived and checked up on me and the damage. At some point, my husband was called and was told that I would be escorted home by one of the officers. I took the next few days off and started looking for another job where I wasn't by myself all night. I went on to leave this job a month later and started at a credit card machine company. It was an office full of people, still a call center, but I felt safer, especially with the security cameras all over the building. Like I said before, this company is no longer around. It was bought by another company, and they basically liquidated all the funds. So dirty man who tried to break into my office, let's never meet again. I worked the night shift at a hotel, so I've had tons of weirdos come through, but this is the most recent one. Everything started off normally. Usually once I clock in at 11 p.m., I can just sit at my desk and only see a few people. I'm a loner. I prefer it that way. Anyways, about 2:30 in the morning, a guy in his 30s comes down and stands right in front of me, at my desk. I've worked this job for 5 years, so I could pick out the weirdos pretty well. I knew right away something was off about him. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me. So I asked him, "Can I help you?" He mumbled something, but all I could make out was the word, "coffee." I tell him there's fresh coffee available in the breakfast area right behind him. So he turns and looks looks back at me, confused. "Do you have some coffee I can take up to my room?" My first thought was, this guy is drunk as hell. And I told him that he could take a cup of the already made coffee, or I could also give him a couple packs to take to his room. He decided on the packs, so I grabbed a couple, hoping that that's all he wanted, and I could go back to watching TV. But no such luck. He just kept standing in front of me, looking at the packets of coffee, confused like. I had enough of this drunk guy, so I walked over to the other side of the desk, just ignoring him. After a few minutes, he just wanders into the breakfast area and stares at the pot of coffee. Then he wanders over to the fruit, the cereal, yogurt, back to the coffee, just staring at everything. After a while of that, he stops looking at the food and looks at the ground, then starts muttering to himself as he's walking in circles. He's at least 6 inches taller than me and roughly about 50 pounds heavier, and I'm the only one on shift. I start thinking about my escape options, like locking myself in the laundry room or running to the gas station next door. I've had to do it a few times when things have gotten really bad, so I try to plan ahead when something is giving me bad vibes. After about 15 minutes of him walking in circles, he heads down the hall, still muttering. I relax, happy that he's gone to bed to pass out. Probably 5 minutes later, I glance out the front doors and I see him right there, staring at me, smoking a cigarette and still talking to himself. I start to think he's high on drugs, and that scares me enough to grab a pair of scissors when he's not looking and hold him down to my side. I start thinking about calling the police, but what for? So I decide to wait and hope he just goes to bed soon, since it's about 3 a.m. at this point. He walks down the halls, through the lobby and outside, then comes back through the doors and loops around again. The third time he walks by, still talking. I was terrified and on the verge of saying screw it, calling the police, just to have someone else there with me. Just then, an old lady walks down to the desk and asks me if I could call her a cab. She has no idea how happy I was to see her. I make the call for her and start chatting her up, which is very unusual for me, but I just want to keep her in the lobby. The weirdo comes around the corner for the 4th time, and the old woman tells him to pack his stuff. They're leaving because he woke her up and she couldn't go back to sleep. Apparently, this old lady was the weird guy's mom, and I felt so much better knowing that he was going to leave as soon as the cab got there. As soon as she told him to pack his stuff, he gets angry. He didn't want to leave. He told her to go back to bed, but she was very adamant. And after they argued for a bit, he makes his way upstairs to pack. She explained to me that she could tell he was getting agitated, and it was time to take him home. I talked to her for a while, and she started to open up to me, and told me her son is schizophrenic, and she is the only one that will take care of him. She told me she just wished someone would take him for about 6 months, like a hospital, to get him on meds and into a good routine. I felt so awful for her. She seemed tired and hopeless. I have mental issues myself, so I could relate to the struggle. All of a sudden, the weird guy comes running out, demanding to stay, and they argue again. Except this time, he sees me watching and focuses on me, storming up to my desk and screaming, "She's gonna call the cops. I didn't do anything. Are you gonna clean my kitchen? Why aren't you sucking my dick yet?" And other horrible things while I just stood there, stunned. I held up scissors to defend myself, and his mom screamed, "Stop! Do you hear what you're saying to her?" The cab pulled up, and as much as I felt for his mom, I was happy to see them pull away. Creepy schizo guy. Let's not meet again. This is just an account of my true experiences. First of all, I like to say I'm generally pretty skeptical of the paranormal and hauntings. I do believe that demons can possess and cause havoc, but when it comes to ghosts and spirits, that's a different story. Be that as it may, there are things that have happened to me that might be called paranormal. There's two different instances. The first is during my time as a night security guard, and the second is a series of dreams. There's no big scary monster at the end or anything like that. When I was working as a security guard, I would often be the overnight guard, probably because I was a young guy and could easily handle the sudden shifts in day or night. Being an overnight guard meant to patrol the property, which included 7 buildings, one of which was an old manor-like house that belonged to a prominent family in our city. This house was spooky enough as it is, but every once in a while during patrol, the lamp in the front window would be on, and I would have to enter the house to turn it off. I just wrote off at someone leaving it on after one of the tours, but even during the day, the house had an unsettling feeling, as if something was watching you. Other times, the alarm of the house would be tripped, and I would have to go to investigate. Every time this happened, I wouldn't find anything inside, and all the entryways were closed and locked. Again, I chalked it up to something reasonable. A faulty sensor, or a gust of wind hitting the window just enough to move the sensor. The main gallery was where I was stationed when I wasn't on patrol. The building had a main lobby where guests came in to buy tickets, and a gift shop, and then the gallery itself. The gallery was a descending spiral that went down below the lobby and had multiple levels. I would sit in the lobby and use the big television they had play on loop of upcoming events and gallery previews to watch Batman Beyond or Dexter in between patrols. In hindsight, it was probably a bad decision to watch Dexter because there was a big open window to the street outside, and not everything in the show is exactly savory for work. One day I re-entered the lobby from patrol. The show, which had been on pause, was already playing. I immediately checked the doors to make sure they were indeed locked. The only one that wasn't was the one I had just unlocked to let myself in. I locked it and then paused the show. I looked around but saw nothing. However, I heard a noise coming from the main gallery. I went to the door and checked it. It too was locked, and this is the only door to the gallery. So I decided to unlock it and step inside. It was pitch black down the descending ramp, and saw a dull but steady light glowing from one of the corridors at the bottom. Now, the particular exhibit that was being featured in the gallery at the time was a rock and roll exhibit. There were pictures of the rock stars in front of the huge crowds in the studio, some blown up versions of album covers, and there were a few TVs that played music on a loop to show off the artistic nature of the music videos. As I made my way down the ramp, I began to hear that the light was coming from one of those TVs and the video was playing. So as I reached the bottom, I shut off the TV and found myself in the pitch darkness of the gallery. The air was cold, and I had that uneasy feeling that I get in the other building. I quickly ascended the ramp and out of the gallery. As I exited the gallery and was locking it back up, from the front door of the lobby came a loud noise, as if someone had slammed the door, but that wasn't possible, because the doors have those pressurized arms to prevent slamming or any kind of fast closing in general. When I looked over to it, there was no one there, and I would have seen them, because as I mentioned, there's a big open window, and I would have been able to see them easily. Now I was getting unsettled. I shook it off and decided to go back to my show. I rewound the bit that had been playing while I was on patrol and continued to watch. A while later, As I was getting up to patrol again, there suddenly came a loud crash from the gift shop. I shot upright and looked over to it. I took my flashlight and shined it through the security gate to look inside. There was nothing that I could see. But there came another crash, as if an entire shelf of merchandise was knocked over. But there was nothing on the floor. After that, I decided I was going to sit in the guard room for the rest of the night. Forget the patrol. The next day I talked to my boss and went to apologize for the mess in the gift shop, and that I would have cleaned it up if I had the code to the security gate. My boss just looked at me confused and said there was nothing knocked over or out of place. That sentence sent a shiver down my spine. So this actually happened to me just last night. I'm still pretty shaken up by the experience and promptly quit this shitty part-time job right after. I work in a retail store in a not so nice part of the town. Since the area isn't the best, not many people come over to the store, and even less people come at night. Something important to note is that the store doesn't have any cameras, nor do they have a panic button. So basically, anyone could do anything, and we have had many people steal little things here and there. Looking back, this should have been my first clue to quit as soon as possible. That night, the night shift consisted of me and my coworker, both small women. We were joking around and playing on our phones because it was 7:30 at this point, and no one had came in for about a half hour. Suddenly a group of people, 2 men and a woman, come in all at once. A side note about these people, they were all wearing black head to toe, facial tattoos, and were very confrontational upon arrival. The woman was a very husky woman, and I was honestly very intimidated by her. Her friends were at least 6 foot each, both towering over me and my coworker, who were about 5'3". One of the men immediately asked what our ages are, and complimented me on my smile. I'm kind of awkwardly laughing, and trying to be as kind as possible to get these people to leave fast. The woman basically corners my coworker over in one of the aisles, so she's unable to walk over to where I am, which is right behind the counter. The woman is basically yelling at my coworker, asking her, "Why don't you hire me? I need work, hire me," pretty much scaring the both of us. While this is going on, one of the men walks over and blocks the door. The other man comes up to the counter and looks at all the $100 to $300 items we have stocked behind the counter, and jokes to his friend how he needs all of these items. He then turns to me and says with a deadpan face, "Give me everything." I awkwardly laugh and say, "Everything?" He then says nothing and continues to stare right into my face for 5 more seconds before repeating, "Everything." So I do just that. I start to take things off the shelves while he points at things and keeps saying, "Give me that, that." He then stops and says, "You never asked me how I was going to pay for any of this." The entire time, his friend was saying nothing and standing still while staring at me. The man breaks his stare and laughs and states that they're going to come right back. As soon as they leave, I make a beeline for the door and lock it. I call my manager and tell her what happened, and I'm begging her to let us close because I don't want those people to come back. As if on cue, they come back and yank on the door, which is now locked, and continue to yank on it. I tell my coworker to run with me to the back, and we lock the back door. By the time the police arrived, they were gone, and there was nothing that they could do because of the lack of cameras in the store. The police stayed outside of the store in their cars until we closed, and walked us to our cars. Throughout this whole ordeal, no one was in the store besides my coworker and I. My theory was that they were scoping out the situation before leaving and coming back with a firearm and actually carrying out the robbery. Luckily, I locked the door at that moment they stepped out. I don't like to think what could have happened if I brushed it off and decided to leave the store open. But I was shaking like a leaf when they left, and they hadn't really done anything at all, so I just trusted my gut feeling. So anyway, let's not meet again. I quit that shitty job. Thank you for being a catalyst to push me to finally leave. So I'm not the best at writing or describing things, but something happened to me 3 days ago, and it's been on my mind non-stop. I've had nightmares a lot. I'm going away for 5 months this summer to work in Greece. Same thing I did last year. But this time, it's not as much of a last minute decision. So I planned ahead to take a few family members away on a low budget British Caravan holiday so we could spend some time together before I leave. I booked it the week for Friday to Friday. The first few days were good, celebrating Wales winning the Grand Slam in rugby. Monday was much the same. We played bingo in the on-site clubhouse, and this is when I noticed a member of their security team. He looked quite attractive from a distance. I like beards, glasses, so I said to my mother, "Oh, he's nice," and we laughed. A bit later, he approached our table and chatted with us for a little bit about general things going on site and his job. He shook my hand and introduced himself. He then stood by our table on and off all night trying to engage in general conversation. He did make excessive eye contact with me, which was weird, so that's why I thought I was getting such bad anxiety being around him, because he seemed otherwise normal. When we were leaving, he was on duty in the front of the clubhouse. We walked past him and said bye. He said something along the lines of, "Oh, don't go. I've got 2 days off and won't be able to see you." Which I thought was weird because we just met him and had nothing but basic conversation. My mom thought I liked him, so she said she was going to catch up to my dad and let me talk to him. He looked like he was about to say something, but I wasn't interested in being alone with him, so I said, "Can't believe she left me behind. See ya." I could feel him watching me through the dark car park. Again, anxiety. 2 days went by and things were normal, but on the day that he came back for duty, Wednesday, he noticed us straight away and walked over. He winked at me and stood right next to me, putting his elbows on the table, tried to chat away with me, a bit too close to my face. I shrugged it off and went to go play with my nephew in the arcade bowling machine. I could see him out of the corner of my eye watching me from behind. Again, I got really bad anxiety. I went back to my parents' table, and he would walk by every few minutes, looking at me each time. I couldn't stand the anxious feeling in my gut, so I waited until he was gone and made an excuse and went back to the Caravan alone. My parents arrived back a few hours later and told me he kept stopping by asking about me and asking where I was and if he needed to check on me. He gave my mother a piece of paper with his number on it to give to me. I was embarrassed by that and joked with my mother, like who tries to get someone's mom to be their wingwoman. Thursday was our last day. I decided not to go out because I felt uncomfortable going there now after being watched and throwing his number in a bin. But my parents went elsewhere, so I stayed packing and babysitting my nephew. This is where I got really freaked out. He somehow found my number and began sending me messages on WhatsApp. I replied at first, being polite, and mentioned that I was packing and going home. He started to get a little flirty, so I put the phone on silent and went to bed. My mom had her window and curtains wide open. My dad had fallen asleep on the couch watching TV with my nephew, and I was in the single room alone. I woke up later because I heard rustling noises outside. I froze for a second, but I could hear movement outside by my window. I looked through the teeny gap, and I saw him standing there looking around, and I genuinely thought I was going to have a heart attack. I've never been paralyzed with fear before. I felt like I needed a cough, but I was so terrified to make a sound. I looked at my phone and it was 3:30. I saw a bunch of WhatsApp notifications. I was too scared to open them, so I read a bit from the notification bubble. He told me he knew where I was, and he wanted me to dangle myself out the window for him to play with, along with sending me pictures of himself naked, numerous calls and texts, and all while outside my window. I laid there for about 2 hours, too afraid to move. I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I remember was my mom waking me up, saying that she had just opened the curtains in the living room and saw him standing right outside. This was 9 a.m., 6 hours later. I never felt so scared in my life. We packed up and got ready to leave. By the time we were about to go, he had gone. I ran to my car with my hood up, paranoid that he would stop us. My parents thought it was really weird for him being out there, but I never told them about all the messages, so they didn't know why I was being so weird. I felt so sick waiting for my dad to start the engine, because I didn't know where he had gone, or if he was still watching. If he had found out my number, and Caravan, and had seen us in my dad's car with the license plate, what else could he have found out? I have not mentioned this to anyone, because I really can't handle it right now. I feel violated in a way, although I don't know how to describe it. So I'm a female, 23 now, but in this story I was 21 with a 4-month-old baby. I'm about 5'9", a bit overweight, and I have social anxiety around new people. I went with my sister to her work. She was 26 and 5 feet tall. She worked at a very nice restaurant in a shopping center, and we went straight there for a 6 p.m. start after being in the city all day collecting money for a cat rescue. I'm just chilling out, eating food and binging on Reddit when I decided I wanted a smoke. I know, bad habit. So I let my sister know I'm going out to the car park to have a smoke as she passes through the dining area. The cart was only about 70 meters away from the restaurant, having good lighting, and because it was so late, I could hang around near the doors. This is where it gets creepy. The security guard was doing his rounds, at about my height, and Indian. He decides to check on me. That's cool, man. I'm just having a smoke. The conversation goes like this. How you doing? You okay? I'm pretty good. I'm just waiting for my sister to get off work. Good. Your baby? Very cute baby. I have 4 at home. You got a husband? Yes, he's my baby. That's good. I have a fiance, which was a complete lie. I was 100% single, but he was already making me anxious. I could be husband. I look after baby for you. I look after you. No thanks. I'm sure your wife wouldn't appreciate that. No. Wife loves baby. Wife will love you. You come home with me? Finally, I finished my smoke and moved further away from him each second. No thanks. I'm good now. He follows me inside. I go all around the mostly closed shopping center, hoping that I would lose him in Kohl's. I lost him for about 5 seconds, but Kohl's shut down for the night. The only place left open was my sister's work, so I went back there even though I didn't want him to know where I was. As I was about to walk into the restaurant, I saw him coming up the escalator. He was still watching me. I take the last 2 steps towards the hostess, who happens to be the owner's daughter, and told her what was going on. At this point, the security guard was standing in front of the restaurant, still staring at me. The hostess takes me into a semi-secluded booth and goes to talk to her dad about the situation. As she's gone, the creepy security guard comes into the dining area, searches for me, and then comes and sits in my booth, way too close to me and my child. How are you? I want to ravish a pretty woman. You will be the mother of my babies. We will make cute babies. At this point, it was very clear that I was uncomfortable, and he still made it worse. Don't worry. I security. I protect you and the baby. He reaches across the table with one hand now. The other hand is reaching towards my baby. I'm frozen. I didn't care about the hand near me. I was watching the other one. No one touches my baby. I'm about to snap, full mama bear mode, when the owner, 40-ish to 50 years old, 6 feet tall, big wide build, of the restaurant steps in, asking if there's a problem. Is there a problem? No problem. Just talking with my lovely lady. This is a customer. Has she done something wrong? No, never. She's my lady, see? We're gonna get married. And then he grins creepily, the silent warning for me to play along etched in his face. Finding comfort in the restaurant owner's presence, I said, please leave me alone. I just want to eat my dinner. Haha, funny lady. See, we joke. I don't know you. Please leave me alone. She says she wants you to leave now. She's just messing. She loved me. I've been waiting for you, my pretty lady. He leaves at that point. The restaurant owner makes sure I'm okay and moves me to the employee break room and then fills my sister in. 2 hours later, and my sister has finished her shift, we pack up and head out to the car. The security guard appears out of nowhere. He was actually waiting for me. I take pretty lady and baby home now. Come, pretty lady, we go home. The restaurant owner, like an angel, steps out of his car right behind the security guard and says, she's going home with her sister. No, pretty lady mine. She come home with me. Get in the car, I'll take care of this. So we get in the car and go home. Find out that the next day from my sister that her boss had physically restrained the security guard because he went to go grab my arm as I was getting in the car. He then got him fired and permanently banned from the shopping center. About 4 years ago, I worked as a laundress. I worked 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. and would often work alone. We usually have a security guard posted near the parking lot. They would carry a radio and pepper spray, and later in the day, they would patrol the building. A new guy started, and I never saw him watching over the parking lot when I would come in each morning. Throughout my shift, he would come into my laundry room. He was talkative, but I noticed that he would look at my body a lot when he thought I wouldn't notice. One day I came into work and started putting my stuff away and getting ready to begin. I hadn't turned on all the lights yet, so there was parts of the room I couldn't see. Suddenly, I hear the radio static from the corner of the room and see a red radio light. I turn on the lights and the new guy is in the corner of the room, hiding and watching me. When I asked him what he was doing there, he said he was just hanging out and started laughing. It was obvious he was waiting for me. He ended up doing this so often that I got used to it. I came in early one day and was working one of our smaller areas. He came into the smaller room and was talking to me. He is a big guy, so I couldn't see around him. He was just talking to me, but I couldn't move or leave the room because he blocked the door. He asked me why I came in early that day, and I told him it's because I had to leave early later. He told me I was required to tell him all my hours, so he would always know where I was. He was leaning over me, and I felt like he was trying to make me upset. I had a horrible feeling in my stomach that he was about to try something, so I pushed past him and called my supervisor. My supervisor said he would keep an eye on him. I told him that I had a bad feeling about this guy and that I needed to leave for the day. The next day he was fired. Apparently, he wasn't at the guard tower at the start of his shift because he would spend the mornings in the woods near the parking lot area, recording girls walking in for their shifts each morning. They found a huge collection of soda cans and coffee cups in his locker that he admitted later that he has drug out from various trash bins around where the girls worked that were once used by the girls. I work in a jewelry store in a small mall somewhere remote in Canada. It's a fun job. I love my coworkers, love the customers, and love the fixed schedule working in the mall gives me. It's nice to know that I'll be off at 6 p.m. every night and it gives me plenty of time to socialize and study outside of work. The mall is a small loop, probably about 50 stores operating on average. They employ a staff of 30 people to keep the mall operating. Half of the staff works in admin, and another 15 or so works security. As a regular 40-hour-a-week employee, I've had my fair share of interaction with security. Having them escort me to the bus stop on an occasional night inventory had me working in late, or calling him into the store to deal with an irate customer. Over the years, I became good acquaintances with a few of the security guards. My favorites were Will, April, and Mark. Will was the friendliest. He would pop his head into the store and say good morning to me when I'm opening. April was the most by the book security guard. She usually helped me deal with difficult customers. Mark was one of the evening security guards, so my only interaction with him was to escort me late at night to the bus stop, during which he was quiet but polite. A scheduled shuffle last year put Will on parking lot patrols, April mostly on the evening shift, and put Mark on day duty. Not the end of the world, just kinda sucked that I would no longer have friendly conversations with Will as I opened the store, and not having badass April around to step in when customers were unruly. Mark was a lot more quiet than his two counterparts, and just wasn't quite as friendly. I didn't interact with him much for the first few months after this new schedule started. I'd give him a smile as he walked by my store, and had him help me out a few times with shoplifters, but beyond that, nada. No great friendship blossoming out of the schedule rotation. About 2 months after the schedules had changed, I had a bad encounter with Mark. I was walking through one of the mall staff hallways to take a washroom break. Mark happened to be just ahead of me and was also going to the washroom. When we reached the doors, he looked me up and down, and then said, "This is gonna be too hard." I had got a bit of a chill when he said that, but assumed that there was an issue in the men's washroom. Someone passed out in the stall or something. So I asked him, "Oh no, why?" Because I'm nosy and was excited to have a bit of mall gossip to share with my coworkers. He got a cold, distant look in his eye and said, "My doctor advised against heavy lifting," and then winked at me. I ran into the girls' washroom and texted my manager. I was freaking out about what he just said, knowing full well what he meant. Mark is a 45-year-old man with graying hair and a bit of a beer gut. He stands about 6 feet tall, and I'm a teeny 5'7" girl who was 25 at the time of this incident. It creeped me out so much that I reported it to April, my next shift, who promised that she would handle it. I stopped seeing Mark during patrols and assumed he had been switched back to day shifts. For about 2 weeks I heard nothing from him or any of the other security guards. I was just about to end my shift one evening, with about 15 minutes left before we closed the doors for the day. I hear someone enter my store, and I look up, and Mark's walking towards me with just a pure look of hate in his face. I wasn't working alone, so I stepped into the back room to avoid dealing with him. It didn't work. Mark threw the door to my back room open and stood there screaming his lungs out at me. How it was my fault that he lost his job, how I'd ruined his life, and how I was gonna pay for my mistake. He viewed the sexual comment as a joke and thought that I was a bitch straight from hell for reporting him. He screamed for a few minutes, then the second he paused for a breath, I calmly told him to get the fuck out of my store because I was calling the cops and security. He ran out of the store and a moment later Will sprinted in. He just screamed at me, "Where the fuck did he go?" And I just pointed and started crying. I was shaking from our confrontation and I gave my statement to the police and the mall security. Mark had been fired after my report, but security was adamant that it wasn't my fault. Mark had racked up a bunch of complaints over his years, and it was just a straw that broke the camel's back. He was banned from the mall the day he got fired, and criminally trespassed when he came in to scream at me. Authorities issued a warrant for him, and it took weeks for him to reappear and be arrested. During those weeks, I was very scared. Mark knew what bus I took. Mark knew my work schedule. Mark hated me. Every time I turned a corner, I was scared that he would be there. I believe he's out of jail now, but I hope I never see Mark again. Okay, so this happened 20 years ago, which means I was probably around 8 or 9. My mom used to work at a medical center for athletes, and I'd sometimes go with her to work because they had a little park and a basketball court. Sometimes I'd go with my cousins, and sometimes I'd go with Beth. Beth was the daughter of a lady that helped my grandmother keep the house in order, and she often came around to hang out, even though she was 6 or 7 years older than me. So that afternoon, we went to my mom's work, and Beth and I hung out in the park. At some point, we were approached by a security guard. He asked us who we were because it was a public facility. People of all sorts came and went, so I didn't think him asking us that was weird, you know? Maybe he was just asking for security reasons. I don't know. So we told him. He proceeds to tell us that we were very pretty and so well behaved, which was whatever. I didn't think too much about it, but I could tell by the look on Beth's face something was off. Probably noticing Beth was feeling uneasy, he started addressing me directly, telling me that he had some toys and games at his booth and that he would love to show them to me. Now, my mom always told me about stranger danger and all that, but I thought, hey, this dude works here. He knows my mom. He wouldn't do anything to harm me, right? So my first instinct was to say, yeah, okay. Beth was having none of it though. She grabbed my arm, positioned herself between us and said, no thank you. I remember frowning and asking why not, which the guy parroted, and Beth just said, her mom is waiting for us and we should be going now, and probably pulled me away towards my mom's building. I asked her, why not, again as we walked, but she told me that man was a bad man. It wasn't until I was about 16 and my mom came home from work saying that the security guard had been arrested for harassing or sexually abusing, I'm not sure, one of the female athletes, that I remembered what happened and finally understood. Thank God for Beth. I used to be a security officer at a homeless shelter earlier this year. I worked there for almost 5 months before leaving. I have tons of creepy and scary stories from my time there. So back in March, I was at work doing what I needed to do. On the ground floor was a daytime only homeless shelter, and on the top was a government homeless outreach office. This is who my contact was through, but I had to keep the entire building secure, even though the shelter was a different organization. The government office was a mental health branch, so it wasn't uncommon for crazy people to, well, act crazy. This particular day, an individual comes in to pick up their medication. The man took their medication and walked over to the couch and sits there in the office. After sitting down, the guy starts digging through his backpack, pulls out a bag full of white pills. This instantly catches my attention. He grabs his pocket knife, doesn't open the blade, but smashes 3 or 4 pills and uses his hand to make 3 lines, then snorts the dust up. What remained he swept off the table. This is now considered to be an acting hostile and potentially illegal, so I walk over to him and start trying to make him leave. He keeps telling me, "I gotta take my meds." I inform him that he needs to leave. Then he says out loud without looking at me, "I got a suppressed 9mm in my bag that will make you and that bitch shut up." Alarm bells start ringing. I know that I have a potential active shooter scenario in my hands, and I'm an unarmed officer. I calmly walk backwards to the receptionist and whisper to her to get the other client up and call 911 and lock herself in the exam room and do not open the door. She does this, as well as informing the other caseworker of the situation, and they lock and barricade the doors. There are cameras in the lobby, so this is all recorded and turned over to the police. After many other attempts to get this man to leave and informing him that the police were called and en route, he gets up, gets in my face, and tells me quietly, "I'm coming back for you one day," and then storms out. The police arrive 5 minutes later, and they examine the footage. They put out an APB on the man and take samples of the powder on the table. A few days later, they informed me that they found the man with no guns and no drugs. The powder turned out to be antipsychotic medicine. He had alleged that he lost the bottle they came in. Nothing bad happened, but still, for a 19-year-old unarmed security guard, this scared the shit out of me. His wife shortly left him and took full custody of their newborn baby.